Okay, good evening. There is a lot to discuss as always because sport never stops. A lot going on with Spanish football and the Spanish FA and the women's setup and FIFA getting involved in suspending the Spanish FA president, Luis Rubiales. Um, that's a culmination of a lot of issues. Obviously, what happened at the World Cup final trophy presentation, I think, is as I say, a culmination of a very long running load of issues. That was the straw that broke the camel's back in that instance, but there was a lot of issues leading up to his suspension within Spanish football and outside Spanish football. But a lot's happened, and it's obviously come to a head now. Yeah, that's a very messy situation. Obviously, we've covered Mason Greenwood's departure from Manchester United. I did a video on that, and that's created some talking points. We can debate the culture of Manchester United as a football club internally, and we can debate obviously Mason Greenwood as a human being rather than just a player, because on the field there is no doubt he adds to the Manchester United system. He's a great player, lot of potential. It's the off-field stuff that clearly has derailed his career, and whether he resurrects it and whether he gets signed by another club, if another club is brave enough uh, to to sign him on their books. Obviously, the World Cup warm-up games, England have been beaten by Fiji for the first time in their history ever at home at Twickenham. Steve Borthwick's under a lot of pressure going into the World Cup. That's 5 out of 6 games England have lost. And there's a lot of speculation about Steve Borthwick's future already. We haven't even started the World Cup yet. That's in 3 weeks' time the World Cup kicks off. So England are going into the Rugby World Cup under a lot of pressure, underperforming. Some selections have eyebrows have been raised. Obviously, the domestic game has had its issues in the last 12 months, with 3 clubs going out of business at the top level, and so there's that debate about the state of the game in England. They're in a very tough group as well, but the form going in is really troubling. Eddie Jones, Australian coach, under pressure as well. Australia under pressure. Their form hasn't been great going into the World Cup. The All Blacks have had a record-breaking defeat by the Springboks, also at Twickenham yesterday, and discipline was a major issue. 2 yellows and a red, hammered by the Springboks on the scoreboard. They really let themselves down. So there's a lot going on. A lot going on as always. Rugby league news, obviously, right at the pointy end of the NRL season now. Some big clubs who've been at the top end of the NRL ladder for the best part of a decade are potentially could miss out on the top 8. That's the Rabbitohs, the North Queensland Cowboys, the Roosters. They're all vying for that one remaining spot, basically, in the top 8. That is going down to the wire. So there's the pressure's really on. Obviously, there's some suspensions being handed out, and we can debate obviously suspensions in sport. Obviously, in a month's time, the NHL will be taking some pre-season games to Australia. There's a lot of risk involved in that as well, and we can debate the pros and cons of that decision by the NHL to take 2 pre-season games to Melbourne next month. That's a month away. A lot of debate about that. But yeah, the Rugby World Cup, I'm not really invested in it yet. I haven't seen a lot of promotion for it. I know it's obviously in France, and there's a lot of negativity surrounding some of the home nations going into the tournament. And of course, England and Wales are the ones most under the spotlight for their performances leading in to the tournament. And Steve Borthwick, we have to have a look at what's going on with the RFU in England and domestic rugby union and the club game and the direction the sport's taking with rule changes. And is the sport at a major crossroads? I think that is a fair point of contention to look at. But losing to Fiji at home Um, it sums up a very poor period that the national side has been facing. Steve Borthwick has only been in the role a very short time, so he came in under pressure, partly because of the end of the Eddie Jones era, but the performances haven't been great. There has been some question marks over selection of players, and of course the domestic game has gone through some upheaval in recent months, with three clubs obviously going out of business, which has had a knock on impact on players. They've had to sign for new clubs. Some of them have had to sign overseas, which means that impacts their eligibility for selection for the national side. But losing to Fiji caps off a really tough period that England, as a test nation, are facing. Good afternoon, Tommy. Yeah, so there's a lot going on. A lot going on. Obviously, the Spanish FA situation with Luis Rubiales being suspended by FIFA, and how that's completely exploded and snowballed and gained a momentum all of its own. But I do think the Hermoso kiss and what did and didn't happen, was it not consensual? That is a culmination of a lot of issues within the internal structures of the Spanish FA and the women's game and the men's game. It's a lot of it build up of a lot of problems over a long period of time, and this is the moment now where clearly the Spanish Federation, and the politics behind it and the issues within Spanish football have come to a head, and the straw that breaks the camel's back. Obviously, over the last few years, Spanish football, a lot of question marks have been raised about the finances of the game in Spain, with some of the big clubs like Barcelona and Real Madrid having massive debts, to the European Super League debacle, to wanting to take games, regular season games overseas, um, to last year during the Euros, a lot of players boycotting the national side because of the head coach. They were threatening to boycott the World Cup campaign. They come back into the fold. They win the tournament. Without those 9 players, they don't get to the final. Now, 11 members of the coaching setup and support staff surrounding the senior women's team and the junior women's teams have resigned. Rubiales obviously gave his statement in front of delegates at the Spanish FA headquarters in Madrid. I think it was Thursday. Very defiant, denying the allegations, what been put forward. Then there's speculation about Hermoso's Instagram and what happened at the time, because nothing was said at the time last weekend when the final was played and the trophy presented. Nothing was said at the time. It's all been this week in the last couple of days, because speculations, swirling around. But I think this is a culmination of a lot of problems in both the men's and women's games, both with domestic clubs and the international setup. A lot of politics within the Spanish FA, and this is a culmination of a lot of issues. But then Infantino, as the head of FIFA, has made some statements in Qatar with the Men's World Cup and the Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, which have met with a lot of condemnation as well. And now FIFA decided to suspend Rubiales following a tumultuous week. And yes, it has overshadowed, yes. The stoppage time, I'm not a fan of it. I think it's a simple solution. Other sports, when there's a break in play, they pause the clock, they blow the whistle, the clock stops. When play resumes, the clock starts again. I watch a lot of rugby league, I watch a lot of ice hockey, watch a lot of rugby union. I will be watching as much as I can of the Rugby World Cup. When there is a stoppage in play, they stop the clock. I think that's the way to solve it. We saw the time wasting in the World Cup final, Women's World Cup final. We saw that added time, which was completely unnecessary. Whereas in the first half, 1 minute. Second half, 14 minutes. But there were some league games last weekend as well. When I was doing actually a live streaming, I think looking all the final scores would have come in for 3 o'clock kickoff. Some league games in the lower divisions had 12 to 15 minutes of added time in the second half. Unless there's a severe injury, I can't understand that. I understand FIFA brought out this directive that domestic FAs have to implement, with variations, but they have to implement. I think FIFA have got that one wrong. But this is a sport and an organisation that's very slow on the uptake on technology and speeding up play. It hasn't stopped time wasting, because as we saw in the Women's World Cup, second half, especially the last 30 minutes of the 90 before the overtime, the Spanish realised that the English have to come out and play. Let's slow the play down. Let's disrupt the flow. Um, so yeah, I don't agree with it either. I think FIFA have got that one wrong. Really, I think FIFA have got that one wrong in trying to tackle time wasting and deliberate slowing down of play. I think there's better ways to speed up play. So we'll see what happens. Wrexham having a slow start. I'm not surprised. It is a step up in quality and level, but Newport are more established in the Football League, so I'm not surprised that is the case. There's only so much momentum you can get out of what Wrexham have done, but I mean, we're talking about a slow start to the season. We're still in August. This is what's ridiculous: is how late the football season finished last season in June, when we're talking about playoff finals and cup finals and European finals being played in June. That was a bit surprising. That's the disruption that two things have had: COVID and rescheduling the Euros and the World Cup taking place mid-season. That's the disruption we've seen over the last 3 years, culminating in a really late finish to last season. We're not even in September, and we're talking about a slow start to the season, and X amount of games being. It's ridiculous. I think is the season too long? Do we need to look at the cup competitions and of course the European competitions with getting rid of group stages? I think that would be a fantastic thing. But on a serious note, I think right now the season is too long, and we're seeing that debate in a lot of sports. That the season's too long. I mean, look at the Stanley Cup being awarded in June, and very late on in June, and it's getting later and later. And there's that debate in North America with the NHL in regards to length of season and length of off season and pre-season and how much time should there really be? Should they start the season earlier? Do they start it later? Do they end the season earlier or later? There's a lot to discuss. It's the same with the NBA as well. Although the NBA generally does start a few weeks later than the NHL, but their playoffs were taking place at the same time. So again, length of season, length of schedule, balancing the schedule. That's a big debate. Have I done most? Yeah, I think there's a handful I haven't done. I think Barnet's one that I need to do. And I think Dagenham and Redbridge is another one I need to do. But I've done most of the professional football league, and I think most of the professional non-league clubs. I think in London, I think I've covered. But I've done Sutton United. There's always more that I can look at. I will be doing a few more non-league club videos because you've got Southend, you've got Oldham, you've got Yeovil Town. These are ex football league clubs that I can look at. Barnet's another one. So I did Salford today because I realised there's still a few football league clubs I haven't done. I've got to do a few more in Scotland, and then I will be focusing back on the European leagues at some point. I'll do a football club history every now and then. Um, I think I think FC United and Manchester is the next one I'm going to do because I've just done Salford and that class of '92, and I mentioned that in the video. And with what's going on with Mason Greenwood at Manchester United and the Glazer ownership and the future of that and how they're not very popular owners, the FC United and Manchester video will be a lot of fun to do. Um, the NRL, I don't know. I think Brisbane, I mean, yeah, I'm a Canberra fan. We lost it. I only caught the last 10 minutes of the game because I sort of dozed off, but there was a yellow card in there. It was very, very close. And then right at the end, they get the winning try, and it sort of gives a distorted score. I think Brisbane look very tasty. I think Penrith, I think 3 in a row could be beyond them, although one bad result because they rested some key players and Luai got injured, and there's some squad rotation, some injuries in there. Don't count them out when it actually comes to the games that truly matter. But they've lost a few more games this season than in previous seasons. They're looking a bit more human. There could be a dark horse. We could see a team that's lost by 50 points in the regular season actually win. I think the Raiders are still in the top 8, even with that defeat at Brisbane. They beat Brisbane earlier in the season. They did have a couple of heavy defeats, but they've also won some close games. I think we could see a shocker. I think the Cronulla Sharks could be a dark horse. I think there's a lot of unknowns. There's some, Roosters, Rabbitohs, and Cowboys. One of those is 2 of them are going to miss finals. Cowboys win. Obviously, the Rabbitohs have a week off. The Parramatta aren't making the 8. The Warriors, I think, could be the dark horse bet that a lot of people will put money on. The way they're playing, Although Metcalf has picked up another hamstring injury that ruled him out the first half of the season, their form with him in the side is better than with him out of the side. Tamari Martin is coming back, but he's had limited game time, broken leg. That could be crucial, losing Metcalf. If it's just a little twinge and they've decided to take him out the firing line, rest him up, that could be different. But without Metcalf in the side, I think they lose a little bit. But the Warriors, don't count them out. But I think it's more difficult to predict this season than in previous seasons. I think the Storm should always never be discounted, even though they're up and down and they've had some wobbles and they haven't looked as fluid. But Pappenhausen is back. How much of an impact does he have? Do they stick with Nick Meaney as the long term fullback now? What happens to Nick Meaney and Pappenhausen? How do they fit them both in the team? Pappenhausen's had very limited game time this season in reserve grade, only a handful of games, so he's had limited minutes. Now, while he's been training and rehabbing and keeping fit in the gym, and we know his skill set, he's not ready for a full 80 minutes of first grade, and finals football is completely different. Finals rugby league is completely different to the regular season. It's a different level of intensity. It's basically like Origin for a month, solid with no breaks. So we'll see what happens. Where do I rank Salford in terms of the Greater Manchester clubs? Well, look at their foundation date. That's the stunning thing, is how late they're founded in 1940, and look how long they've been professional, handful of years. So where do I rank them? I think they've got one of the smaller fan bases. Again, very congested sports market, which is what I brought up in the differences between North America and Europe when it comes to our team sports. I missed out sponsorship. I should have done sponsorship as well. How we've had sponsors on jerseys for 40, 45 years. In the US, handful of seasons into having small sponsors on the jerseys, and fans are losing their minds. We've grown very, very used to it. I do think that we go overboard with too many sponsors on our sports strips compared to North America. But I am surprised that the North Americans are kicking off such a fuss about, corporations and companies sponsoring their teams very visibly on the jersey when it's the most capitalist society in the world. Mad, that, isn't it? Very juxtaposition. It's a good word, that. Uh, England and Wales not looking good going into the World Cup. They were never going to be looking good going into the World Cup. Warren Gatland, I don't think is the saviour that Welsh fans think he's going to be. And Steve Borthwick, he's in a catch-22. Obviously, the departure of Eddie Jones was not great. And by the end of Eddie Jones's tenure, things were all over the place. Borthwick was on a flogging to nothing. He's an interim coach and all but name, really. I don't think Borthwick's the coach following the World Cup. But this is where England, have a siege mentality and they do something. They get out of the group stage and go on a bit of a run. 2007 is the example I'll use with Ashton in charge. I think it was Chris Ashton. I think was Dean Ashton. I think it was Dean Ashton was the coach at the time, of a rugby league background, a northerner, and going into that World Cup, there'd been a very poor period between winning 2003, end of Clive Woodward's tenure, and Ashton coming in. The team coached itself. They weren't fluid. They were clunky. There was a poor running of form. They got to a final. They lost twice to South Africa, and they got nilled, I think, in the group stage against South Africa. They got to the final. There's a lot of similarities with 2007, but I think it could be more of a disaster in 2015 proportions, if not worse. But I think Steve Borthwick was in a rock and a hard place. He was in a no-win situation. There was a lot of negativity surrounding Eddie Jones's leaving, how the performances on the field were going, discipline on the field, like with the sin binnings and send-offs and penalty count being too high, and being France and Ireland battering England quite easily, and being very second best, and labouring and against Wales and Scotland and Italy, and not looking very good, and then an below average Six Nations, and then the warm up games have been nothing short of disastrous. And losing to Fiji, I think, sums up that there's a lot of problems there. But then we've got to look at the domestic game and the issues financially, and clubs going bust, and players having to find a place to play. And you either play in France or you play in North America if you want to get a payday. If you want to continue your professional career and make sure you got paid money on time, you've got to look outside of the English game. Wales, similar situation. Players threatening to go on strike, concerns about the financial viability of the game. And then you look at all the rule changes that these various rugby unions are bringing in regards to tackle height. Headshots have never been legal in the game. They've been weakly enforced. The disciplinary side of it, bad techniques got in the game. Same in rugby league. I think rugby league has been more proactive in regards to head contact and dirty hits and poor tackle technique than union. And I think World Rugby and the various unions have been very reactionary, fearing, honestly, because there are more money issues in rugby union than rugby league, ironically, even though it's the bigger code with more players and more clubs. They're fearing the lawsuits. They're being reactionary rather than proactionary, whereas I think rugby league's been more proactionary and having good dialogue with the scientists and the researchers and doctors and medical professionals. Really better dialogue there. The NRL, I think, the NRL's I think bounced back well from the COVID pandemic. I think there are still issues with the NRL in regards to how many rule changes we've had in a very short period of time. The CBA negotiations obviously dragging on for a lengthy period of time. I think was bad form. I think both the RLPA and the NRL could have dealt with that a lot better and a lot quicker. I think that was unnecessarily drawn out by both sides. I can understand the viewpoints of both sides to want to get a deal done that was favourable to them, but there's got to be compromise. And I don't think the working relationship between Clint Newton and Andrew Abdo, I'm bored of saying those names, was very, very good. I think it was courteous and professional to begin with when Andrew Abdo was installed as interim and then NRL full-time NRL CEO back in 2020. But I do think that working relationship has soured, and I don't think it's cordial. But the issues are long-standing between the league and the RLPA that go back 20 odd years. But the fact it took me 2 years to get a deal done is what is the troubling aspect here. Whether Clint Newton and Andrew Abdo are in their positions long term, we shall wait and see. But no, the crowds have been good. The atmosphere's been good. The Warriors have been fantastic playing back in New Zealand. I think that is vital for the league. I think the Dolphins, well, they've had a poor second half to the season following the Origin period. Injuries. They've gone through a lot more players in their starting lineup than I think they would want to. Some of their younger players coming in who have been playing in reserve grade for this season, I think they're not quite ready, but that's good experience for like players like Bostock, for example, and Tavare getting unexpected game time. I think they're going to be better for it in the long term, but in the short term, it's been a bit of a damp squib ending, but people were saying they were going to get the wooden spoon or finish bottom two at the start of the season. They've done a lot better than that, but their second half of the season is a bit troubling. We'll see what a good off season can do for them. Plus, they've got some new recruits coming in some key positions, so they're adding depth for next season. But they're not as bad as the Dragons and the Tigers. Let's just say that the Dragons and the Tigers have got some serious problems. The Titans, when they sacked Holbrook, he won the previous game. They were ninth. They were like, I think, points differential outside the 8. They've fallen off a cliff. That's what happens when you sack a coach unnecessarily. But the Titans have kept hold of their key players, so that's good. Dolphins are going to be a good team. I think they might. I think they might be a good team quicker than that. I think their off season, well, their recruitment for next year looks pretty good, with a couple of good players coming from good systems that are good players in for their state or national side. So I think they've got some good players coming in that add to the depth, who've shown when they've played on bad teams that they're still pretty good players and they stand out as good players. So Alvarillo and Farnsworth, for example, and Flegler, they've played on bad teams and now they're playing on improved teams and they stuck with those teams when things were bad. And you can see that they stand out as very good players. Now, Farnsworth and Flegler are coming from the Broncos. The Broncos have got a lot better under Walters, but they were there under Seabold and under Wayne Bennett in that system when things were going wrong. So they stuck with it, but they were standout players during tough times. Alvarillo and the Bulldogs are better this year under Serraldo. Yeah, they've had a bit of a rough season. They haven't. The Bulldogs haven't been as good as advertised as they were at the start of the season, but they've again injuries and bringing up players from reserve grade who aren't quite ready for the NRL has disrupted them a little bit. I think again the Bulldogs are a better team than they have been this season. Alvarado leaving, I think, is a mistake by the Bulldogs. I think they're making a mistake letting him go. I think Farnworth leaving the Broncos is a mistake as well. And Flegler, I think, why would you let those players go? They've been regular, decent performers, especially when those teams were struggling. They were putting their hand up and playing well. And Farnworth had a very, very good World Cup in defeat as well against Samoa. He was a standout player for England that actually put a shift in, and in my opinion, could have got man of the match in that game. But no, the crowds have been good, and the NRLW, I think, has been a refreshing to see how competitive that is. Even with all the new teams, every team's now won a game because Parramatta won this morning, early hours, our time, early morning, on the early kickoff. And the women's NRLW, they finally won their first game. They've had a lot of player turnover from their elite squad, which they have struggled with the expansion a little bit, but they finally get a win. And it's a very tight ladder in the NRLW, very similar to the NRL. It's a very tight ladder, which is good. It's showing how very, very competitive things are, and some teams are in finals that weren't in finals last positions that weren't there last year, and have kicked on, so it's good. I think Redcliffe, they're from Redcliffe. They will probably still play games at some. I would like to see them play more games at home at Redcliffe at KO over Suncorp. I think that will benefit them having their own home ground where they play week in, week out. But I think part of the agreement early on with that Wayne Bennett connection was to play as many games at Suncorp as possible, get more eyes on the product with fans in attendance. But they sell out their own little home ground anyway. And they've got a good leagues club, and they have got a great youth system. I think that they put more investment into developing their home ground in Redcliffe. It's their spiritual home. But also, we've got to see where the 18th team gets placed as well, because of that discussion around an 18th team, and when that 18th team is going to enter the league, most likely 2025. We'll see what happens there. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It's a good suburban ground. You don't necessarily have to have a big stadium. But look at what Cronulla have done with their Shark Park and the development there, and investing in the surrounding community. I think about 15,000. I think is it, because they're still going to take games to Suncorp. They're still going to play Magic Round games at Suncorp. They have the following. Viewership on TV has been good. I don't think you need a massive stadium, because the risk is then empty seats. But I think Brisbane was crying out for a second team, because Gold Coast is obviously down the road. Who looks better right now? It's too early to tell, really. I think, yeah, it's too early to tell. I think it's going to be a very, very competitive league season this year. I don't think it's going to be as tight. I think it will be tighter at the top than just two clubs going at it. I think Man City, with some of the players they've let go and sold, I think it's going to be, and with De Bruyne out for up to 4 months, I think it's going to be a lot closer than last season. I think more teams are going to be in a title hunt for longer. And I think the FA Cup and League Cup could be a way for some other teams, like a Brighton, for example, look really good to start the season. And West Ham have had a mixed start to the season, but West Ham, I don't think, will be as bad as advertised with some of the players they've lost. I think that they're still got that, we just won a trophy thing. I think they could have a bit of an under the radar season a little bit. I think the clubs that are going to be under the spotlight are the clubs at the bottom of the table, especially Everton. Everton are in serious trouble. It's not just on Sean Dyche. This is a long-term decline at Everton that we've been talking about now for many years on the channel. Is the situation at Everton and the decline at Everton. As I say, that is very, very noticeable. I think third time unlucky. I'm not even sure Sean Dyche will be manager by the January transfer window, and I don't think it's his fault the club are in the position they are in. This is a long-term issue of poor player development. Their transfer dealings are shambolic, and it's boardroom, I think, are to really blame for a lot of the issues that Everton are currently facing. They've thrown money at a problem when internal development could have done the job. They've had their track record historically of developing players is fantastic. Recently, recently, I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, that youth academy is not producing the same quality of talent that they were prior. The same can be said for a lot of clubs actually, and there is a growing disconnect with the fan base and the ownership. I'm not sure fans are really sold on the new stadium. Is if that's the right path to go down. Goodison Park is a historical ground, um, which has obviously had many a famous night. Many a famous player has worn the toffee blue and played at Goodison. Many a great player has played against Everton at Goodison. Um, I don't. I'm still trying to, but this has been an issue for 2.5 decades with Bill Kenwright wanting to move the club away from Goodison. The idea was first broached in the late 90s that they needed a new ground. It will be their third stadium as well. They used to, ironically, a lot of people don't realise they used to own Anfield. The reason why Liverpool Football Club exists is because Everton wanted a new stadium and needed an anchor tenant because they still owned Anfield to fill, and hence Liverpool come along. But that lack of success since the mid 90s is highlighted. One cup final since '95, no trophies, multiple relegation battles, many poor seasons, no success in Europe, even though they've been in the European places, lack of managerial stability, and then the transfer market and player development's been a shambles. Um, the warning signs have been there for some time. The current investment and Bill Kenwright still being involved in the running of the club. This is a club that doesn't have a direction. It seems rudderless. They've spent a lot of money, and they could. I think they're still under potential for points deduction for finances. It's just a mess. The optics don't look good. Former players are criticising the direction the club's been taken down. I don't. I feel sorry for Sean Dyche because I think he, again, much like Steve Borthwick with the England Rugby Union side, it's a rock and a hard place. It's a no-win situation. Um, so I can't see a positive outcome for Sean Dyche. It doesn't matter who the manager is. They've had some world-class managers in there. They've had some great overseas managers in there who've had success, and it's just not working. It doesn't matter if it's a homegrown manager like a Sean Dyche or a successful manager at another club who's either had success in England or overseas. I mean, Ancelotti only lasted a season. I mean, he obviously moved on to Real Madrid, but even if he had stayed, Rafa Benitez, and he's got a connection with the city that he actually has great fondness for. It's just been a disaster. Ronald Koeman, they've had Big Sam in there. It is a mess, and you have to go back to that FA Cup win in '95. Within 3 years, they're in a relegation fight, and they survived on the last day of the season. Had Bolton not had 3 points deducted, they would have gone down. So they rode their luck in '98, got lucky by a technicality. They should have been relegated, but they got lucky by a technicality. And then you fast forward to the David Moyes era, and there was some criticisms of David Moyes' manager. There were some seasons they could have sacked him, but he steadied the ship. He got them to an FA Cup final, which they could have won. They narrowly lost, but they could have won, and that was the high point. And he then, that long period of being, in Europe, competing for the European places, being, very stable, good development of players. Um, it's been a shambles for a decade, if not longer. I think the issue it's the same with Man United with Sir Alex Ferguson, long-term manager, but the issues were there towards the end. I think with David Moyes, the issues were there towards the end. And I don't think that's David Moyes' fault. I think that's again boardroom. Um, I, I, I don't know what else to really add to the Everton situation. But they have declined massively as a club, and you have to question some of their transfers, squad makeup, player development, scouting, youth development, everything from top to bottom. And when a club is in crisis, you have to look at the boardroom. You have to look at the ownership. Everything starts at the top. Culture starts at the top, and direction starts at the top. Everton are in trouble. I think that they are in serious trouble. And people going, well, I still think the Leeds relegation, when they were relegated, was a big one. Manchester United have been relegated before. Liverpool have been relegated before. Um, Chelsea have been outside the top flight. Um, it's just most football fans, especially younger, don't realise pre-92 that a lot of clubs have gone through their dark days. I think the Leeds one in modern times is quite big. The first relegation from the Premier League. I think Blackburn's relegation from the Premier League not long after they won it. I think Leicester, I think, has been a big one not long after they won the Premier League. So there's been some big ones before. Nottingham Forest was a big one I remember in the 90s when obviously they've won 2 European titles and all the success they had with Clough as manager. That was a big one. Aston Villa was a big one when they went down, but they've been relegated out the top flight a few times in their history. Um, so I think because Everton haven't been successful for a long time, yes, it'll be big news, but the clubs that I've mentioned had success not long prior, as in within a decade or so. Everton haven't had success for since 1995, yet they've still been a top flight club. They've been mediocre for a fair portion of that time, and they've been a top flight club for a long time. We're going back to the 50s. They've only, I think, spent 3 or 4 seasons outside the top flight in their history. Not many fans are alive the last time they were in Division Two, which is now the Championship. So we've had 2 or 3 generations of Everton fans that have been blessed by a very stable club with a lot of silverware. The silverware's dried up, but they've been a top flight club. I think it will be big news in the fact that they're the longest tenured top flight club, but we shall see. I think other clubs have had that success in a and then fallen away. So you look at your Blackburns, you look at your Wigan winning the FA Cup going down the same season. That's never happened before. Uh, you got Swansea winning the League Cup a couple of years later out of football leagues. So when you have that silverware and then you go down a few seasons later of the same, that's different. But I do think in Everton's case, I think it will send shockwaves through the club, through the footballing world. I think that will happen. But we shall see. Um, do I think Liverpool are on the decline, or is it a one-off? They're still at the pointy end of the table, but you could argue some squad turnover and some injuries and a bit of loss of form um, obviously has contributed to, and a lot of football has been played, has contributed to a bit of a downswing. Some of their transfers haven't worked as well as they anticipated, and they've lost some key players. But we shall see. Saying that, again, the club going back to the club histories and all that, there are some clubs that I haven't done histories on yet in some of the European leagues, like Deportivo La Coruña, had their purple patch in the late 90s, 2000s. They're currently in the third tier of Spanish football. But that's sinking. Um, you know, there are some very successful clubs that have fallen on hard times. So it's an interesting one, like Racing Santander, for example. They're not a top flight Spanish club anymore. They used to be there or thereabouts. Valencia are in their financial issues right now and struggling, and so there's a lot to look at when I do the club histories. There really is, you know. I think the famous one. A lot of people who watch my club histories mention I should do a video on Blackburn Olympic, and the fact that they don't exist anymore. They were only around for a few years. Yeah, Sampdoria. I've got to do a video on Sampdoria. God, they won a lot of trophies in a very short amount of time, and they haven't won since. I think when Mancini and Vialli left is when they stopped winning. They've got a small trophy window, but they've won a fair bit, and then they don't win anything. That's an interesting one. You can look at, the tough times that Napoli face. Parma's another one. Parma is a very obvious example to use of a club that's been badly run. Let's be honest. Parma has been badly run at times, but I've had success. I had some great players, and looking at Italian football now to the 90s, it's a shadow of its former self. It really, the 80s and 90s for me, on a club standpoint, is when Italy's at its version of the Premier League era. In Italy, that's when Italy was the go-to destination for players. Um, Definitely. But we shall see. But it's an interesting one. Well, there's a lot of discussion about football, but there's a lot of sport discussion to talk about. And I know obviously what's dominating the headlines in the footballing standpoint is what's going on with the Spanish FA and the suspension for 90 days by FIFA of Rubiales and coaching staff resigning en masse and players on strike. And as I said, beginning of the live stream, that's a long-standing build-up of issues within Spanish football. And when I get to doing the video on Deportivo La Coruña, for example, it highlights the precarious nature of finances over in Spain. Yes, I remember the Gazzetta, Football Italia Saturday, and then the Sunday Live game. I remember that quite vividly. It's a shame they obviously Channel 4 and then later on Channel 5 didn't keep the rights. Obviously, the rights expired and no one wanted to pick them up. And then Channel 5 come along for a couple of years and they did pick up the Italian rights. And that was after the Calciopoli match fixing scandal. So just before the match fixing scandal, when there's rumours circulating about some clubs being a bit dodgy in their dealings, and the Parmalat corporate scandal, and of course Parmalat being the major sponsor of Parma and the owners of Parmalat being the owners of Parma. A lot of scandal in Italian football. It was seen as a bit risky to continue to invest, but Channel 4 as a network has been badly run for a long time, and they don't make any money. Channel 5 wanted to increase their market share of the British TV audience. They pick up the Italian football for a couple of years. I remember watching it. That was about 15 years ago. They had the Italian rights. It is a shame that in Italian football they have really damaged the image of the club game, and that's the problem. It's not the litmus test. It's not the top of the big five. Bit of product placement there. I'm just taking the mickey out of Wayne's World, where in the film, because I will not be beholden to any corporate sponsored product placement. He's eating a Pizza Hut and he gets the box at the right angle. I'm not so sure on Serie A and La Liga being a better watch necessarily. I think La Liga is a very, very unbalanced league, and I think Serie A still has a lot of institutional issues as a legacy from the various match fixing scandals over the last 20 or so years that are still hampering that league's growth and selling point to the global audience that it once had as that beacon of this is a location to go for players to play it. The reputational damage is still there, and it's still rebuilding its reputation. Italian stadiums aren't necessarily. You would think Italians, with their architecture, their history, and the emphasis they put on style, would have better stadiums. They are pretty vile stadiums. They are not the most beautiful to look at, I will admit. But you've got to remember, post World War II, Italy was in ruins. It was a country that had fought for the Axis, been invaded, had a civil war. Two Italian armies fighting for either side. It was a country in ruins, from the Swiss border all the way down to Sicily. The country was a smouldering wreck, and they had to rebuild quickly, and concrete was the way to go. You know what I mean? But no, yeah, unfortunately, you've got to look at it on the aspect of we've got to rebuild this country quickly, and there's a lot of corruption in Italy, and there's quickly and cheaply was the way to rebuild Italy. And then and it's just how it went. They were seen as utilitarian. This is what we've got to do. And but Italy is a very Italy is an interesting place. It's a country full of contradictions, but it's a beautiful country with endemic corruption. Corruption is just part of the Italian way of life. Um, economic crisis and corruption and currency devaluation and just it's just a unique country with a unique culture. The best way to describe Italy, I spent a lot of time there, some of the most beautiful Renaissance buildings, Roman ruins, Greek ruins, because obviously there was a lot of Greek city states, especially in the south of Italy. There's loads of classical antiquities. You've got the Renaissance, you've got the early medieval, fortified towns, castles, and then you have their football stadiums and their factory districts and their supermarkets are made out of breeze blocks. And you go, well, this town centre is quite nice. This piazza is beautiful. There's a nice piazza. There's some nice music. And then you go around the corner, it's like, oh, this is a slum. It truly, you go from lovely Renaissance architecture with a nice piazza. You go around the corner and you've got this 1950s, 1960s concrete monolith of a car park. It's just, what is this? Covered in graffiti, and the cars have all got dents in, and it's dirty. But then you go around the corner, you've got this beautiful piazza with fountains and nice little cafes, and it's just like mind blowing. But it's a mad country, mad country. Fantastic people, fantastic food, fantastic culture, but their football stadiums um, are leave a lot to be desired. But it's Italy. Um, the driving standard is unpredictable. They make some of the best cars in the world to look at, also some of the most unreliable. But this is a country for its most famed for its motorsport with Ferrari and Alfa Romeo and Maserati and even Alfa Abarth and Lancia and Alfa Romeo and Fiat, even Fiat's won rally championships with the 131. And then you look at some of their modern buildings and you're like, how the hell has anyone in a planning department with all these UNESCO World Heritage sites allowed that monstrosity to be built right opposite like an ancient monument? It's just you, the food is fantastic, though. The people, the average Italian person is much like the average Brit or the average, German. They just, you know, want to get on with life. The politicians are all crooks. The business owners are all crooks. The average Italian is, how you doing? They're like us. They're like us. I think the best Italians live in the centre of Italy and the south. They're the best. When you go, and obviously they live and breathe, their football, and they like their rugby union as well. They love their motorsport, but take the sport out of it, they're just it's just amazing. They're just it's just a way of life. It's a way of life. It's a country, as I say, full of contradictions, but we're the same. We are the same. You go like obviously some of our big cities are big cities. Same in Italy. The population is just crammed into these. The rural Italy is fantastic. It's like the West Country. It's like the Berkshire Downs. You go outside the big cities and you go into the Yorkshire Dales or the Peak District, and you're like, I'm only 10, 15 miles from Greater Manchester. Or you go on the South Downs and you go, I'm only 20 miles from Greater London. And you're like, I'm in middle of nowhere. But in reality, you're only 20 miles away from 9 million people who, it's chaos. It's the same in Italy, where you go outside of Rome, you go up into the Lazio Hills, and you're like, there's the Eternal City is just there. It's peace and quiet. There's no noise, and you're in just beautiful part of the world. It's mad. It's like it's like Naples. You've got Mount Vesuvius, and you've got the Bay of Naples. Get out of Naples, and it's just like this is beautiful countryside. These are beautiful people. This is peaceful, and you can see why back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, football players wanted to sign in Italy. Partly because of the way of life. On your days off or in the off season, you can go out with your family, and people may not recognise you. You can just go, "Oh, this is quiet." Nice place to nice climate to bring up your kids, it's peaceful, it's quiet, it's relaxing, and then it's just mad. Um, uh, when was the last major Italian? I think it was the current Juventus stadium for the 2006 Winter Olympics, the Stadio da Alpi. Um, that I think was one of the last major ones. I know the San Siro is due to be replaced. I know some stadiums have a lot of renovations. There was a lot of stadiums built for Italia 90, and they were built basically in haste. They weren't built for long. The Bari state, the Stadio San Nicola was built for the Italia 90 tournament. That's an interesting stadium. I don't mind the San Nicola actually. When you look at it, it looks like a coliseum. It does look like um, an amphitheater. It looks like a Roman amphitheater for the gladiators. It looks like a gladiator from the outside with certain aspects and certain angles. But a lot of stadiums were renovated and rebuilt for Italia 90. Um, and that's 33 years ago that these stadiums opened. So it seems like yesterday for a lot of older football. That's Italia 90 was like yesterday, but that's over 3 decades ago. The San Siro's gone through a few renovations. The Stadio Olimpico has been upgraded a fair few times in its history. The Stadio Diego Armando Maradona in Napoli, in Naples, has had some upgrades. I know Catania's, is it Cagliari's home ground? They've got a new one. Um, but for the most part, I think is it Sassuolo have having to ground share with another club because their ground doesn't meet standards. Although Atalanta have had some stadium issues where their stadium had to have some investment. But yeah, for the most part, Italian stadiums there isn't the money. There isn't the public funds. Public projects in Italy tend to take decades rather than years to complete. I'm not joking. And when they do complete them, they have to redo them because they're falling apart because they've used cheap concrete. Um, um, oh, look, motorsport. I mean, I know motorsport is religion, but there's concerns around the state of the Monza circuit, with some of the stands they're building there, and the state of the circuit. A lot of angry motorsport fans in Italy and across Europe who are unhappy with the state of Monza. Um, it's actually in a national park. It's in a former royal park between Monza and Milan. There's a lot of unhappiness with the state of the Monza Autodrome. Um, are industrial states better than the UK and in Italy? Probably not. But the thing is, we've got a bit more money in the economy to build new units and refurb units. There's a lot of investment that's happened in a lot of areas within in the last 30 years in the UK, far more than in Italy, and the speed of building them. Um, I've noticed, at least in the area I live in, there's been a lot of development. We've got a couple of new film studios have been built very very quickly with the sound stages, so it can be done. Um, can be done. Um, Man City could win 4 in a row. I mean, look, I mean, it has. When we have to go back to when Huddersfield Town and Arsenal won consecutive, like 3 in a row. People going, this will never be. I mean, when I did the Huddersfield Town video, I looked in the history books, and when they won 3 in a row, people were like, this will never be done again, and it was by Arsenal. Herbert Chapman managed Huddersfield, goes to Arsenal, repeats the feat. Um, Do I think they can win 4? I think it's going to be a lot more tougher this year than people expect. They've lost De Bruyne for half the season. We'll see how Haaland, his scoring rate without De Bruyne on the field long term, and if he can be a bit more two-dimensional than one-dimensional, if he can actually add more to his game than just knocking the ball in the back of the net. Yes and no, but obviously rules and eras change, and we can argue they should have won, they could have won this, but that was the rules at the time. They lost because of the rules at the time. Under today's rules, that would be different, absolutely, but they didn't. and that's what the history books state was with the rules in place at that time in the 20s. Cardiff didn't win. Um, they do win, obviously, under current rules, but then this is when people go, why do I not compare eras and look at various bits and pieces? Um, it's, it's subjective. I still think Pele was a better player than Ronaldo or Messi, but that's a debate about who's the goat. I hate the term the goat. I think Pele, when he's at his peak, probably is the reason why the World Cup is as big as it is now. Um, you know, appearing in, you know, yeah, I think it went down to the head to head or something silly, and how it works out on. It went down to the last day of the season. That's possibly the best way to look at it. Have I watched NCAA Division One American football before? I have actually. I've actually watched. Well, I watched NCAA collegiate college football. Yes, I think I've watched. I think I've watched a handful of Division One games, but to me, I'm not as I said when I did the differences between North America and European team sport video earlier today. Um, I yeah, I don't have a really an interest in the NCAA. There's a big debate about the NCAA and are the student athletes actually professional? Are they not? Are they being exploited for their talent? You know, could there be reforms made? I didn't go into that, but I think should there be reforms to the NCAA system and player development and minor leagues and a whole host of issues. So there's that. Was the FA Cup bigger than the league at some point? The FA Cup is older than the Football League. I don't know. I think with I think rugby league, the RFL before the Super League era, I think that was quite popular in the north. I think with um, it's a difficult one. I'll have to look at some of the record crowds are at cup games. I know that some record crowds that some clubs have at their highest attendance are cup games. So I think even now, so I think it does still have that impact. Revenue wise, I think the day to day regular season still brings in more revenue on gate receipts than the FA Cup. But clubs could see a payday with you look at record attendances for every club. I would argue that 80% of clubs in existence, their record attendance is an FA Cup tie. That was that one game or that series of games a season where they could actually make a lot of money. And it's the way that the old sports reporting used to report it. Back in the old days, before advent of TV, radio was the medium. Well, TV when it was in its infancy, more people listened to football on the radio, and of course, more people went to games because that's how you actually watched it. Obviously, I would say also what allures about the FA Cup is you might play opposition you wouldn't regularly play from a different league in the league structure. So it's different. I don't know if it was bigger because ultimately, um, you know, you then get the League Cup coming in later on. Ultimately, you're judged by average gate receipts week in, week out, and that's where the league makes you your money. You could be a high flying league side and do really crap in the league because you float in the cup. It's a difficult one. Like in the 20s, I would say doing a League Cup double was what clubs wanted to do. You didn't have the European competitions; the League Cup wasn't a thing. And Huddersfield, I think, were one of the were a club that did it. I think Preston did it back in the day. You that is the moniker of the best team in the country is winning the cup competition and the league. And then you get the League Cup coming along, so domestic treble. I think that's another thing that clubs, when that comes as a competition, wanted to do, get the domestic clean sweep. And then, of course, when you get the European competitions coming along and being thought about with the early ones that weren't UEFA, but the Mitropa Cup and things like that. And when You get things like the Cup Winners' Cup. I think in the 60s and 70s, the FA Cup, and to a certain extent the League Cup, grew in importance because of the Cup Winners' Cup. You could win more silverware, and therefore more money could come into your club through gate receipts, and eventually TV revenue comes along. Which is why I think it was a bit bizarre when UEFA got rid of the Cup Winners' Cup. It devalued the domestic cup competitions for the various leagues across Europe. It did devalue them and made them less important. And now Champions League or Europa League qualification, for example, Europa Conference League qualification, depending on the league you're in, suddenly becomes a big focus for teams rather than actually winning silver. Um, you have to scrap European or the FA Cup. Oh, I would scrap the Europeans personally, or at least alter the formats that we currently have back to what we had before. I would completely get rid of the group stages. I would bring back straight knockouts. I would bring back the Cup Winners' Cup, which is where that UEFA Conference League, that third European competition. I would rebrand that back to the Cup Winners' Cup. I wouldn't scrap the European competitions. I would reformat them to what they were pre 1999. I think. I think. I think UEFA have got that one wrong. They put profits over people because the amount, and then this is also player welfare in there, and this is where the club chairman and the club boards have to take some responsibility. They were pushing for these extra games, yet their managers and players, who are their employees, get shafted. And yes, the players want to play as many games as possible. Obviously, that's what you're paid to do. But yeah, look at the amount of injuries we're now seeing with players. Again, the season's too long. I remember the FA Cup final used to have a replay in my lifetime. I think they didn't. The last FA Cup final replay was, I think, 1990, but I think it was still a thing until the Premier League comes along, and then when English clubs were allowed back into Europe, they scrapped it, even though it hadn't been used for a few years. But the FA Cup final officially had a replay option available until, I think, the mid-90s. I do remember 99, the United treble winning team had to go to a replay in the semi-final against Arsenal, and Ryan Giggs scores his ultimately famous goal, which was voted, I think, was it one of the goals of the century or something? Because obviously the millennium came along, it was voted one of the goals of the century in English football. I remember the FA Cup semi-final replay. I think that was the last one as well. If I remember, was the 99 semi-final between Arsenal and Man United. I think they had record TV viewership as well for a semi-final replay, if I remember rightly. It was ridiculous. That was two ridiculous sides going at it, and I think United were down to 10 men at the point. I think, was it United down to 10 men? Yes, yeah. Roy Keane got sent off. Vieira gave the ball away, and Giggs goes on and makes Martin Keown look like an absolute clown before blasting it past David Seaman. I think, but yeah, the in my lifetime we've had FA Cup final replays, and I was only 6 months old when the 1990 replay was played. So I wouldn't have, my dad would have been watching it, but obviously not me. That was United Palace, and that was Ian Wright's coming of age, because in the first game he has a brilliant game, and Alan Pardew, I think, took them to the replay as well. Second game, it obviously doesn't go their way, but that was the Palace team that had Pardew and Southgate and Ian Wright in it, and then Ian Wright obviously ultimately ends up at Arsenal and has great success. Steve Coppell was the manager of note. I think was Steve Coppell the manager of note? Was he playing for United at the time? Steve Coppell was involved with no. Fergie was the manager of note. Steve Coppell was playing at the time. No, Steve Coppell was the Palace manager. Alan Pardew was playing at the time. I think he was captain, if I remember. And he gets mixed reviews. And Ian Wright was part of the side, and Southgate was part of the side before he goes to Villa. And that's, was the trajectory. Pardew's Alan Pardew, but Wright and Southgate go on to bigger and better things later in their careers, and Alan Pardew ultimately ends up in management. Wright and Bright, yes. Steve Wright. Ian Wright and Mark Bright. Um, but yeah, that was that Palace team. It was actually quite a stacked Palace team. If you look back at it, that Palace team was actually stacked with talent. And then ultimately, the Premier League comes along and they get relegated in the first season. Uh, there's a lot of FA Cup finals I remember. I think a lot for me, the memorable ones are the ones in the 90s and the 2000s. The more recent ones, I think the quality in the more recent ones hasn't been great. The quality in the ones that I remember quite fondly are the 98-99 ones with Newcastle United because I wanted them to win. The 97 final with Di Matteo. You have the 96 final with the Spice Boys of Liverpool versus the class of 92 of Man United. That's the Man United's coming of age party, that one. And that's when you know Liverpool are no longer the dominant club in England. You've got the 95 final where Everton win. Um, and well, what other ones are quite memorable? Um, there's quite a few that are quite memorable. But then there's some other quite forgettable ones as well. Um, I wouldn't say they were a lot bigger then. I think the quality, though, just the quality on the field was better. The actual quality of play was better than what we have now. They were less cagey. They were more, well, winner takes all. You've got to just go out there and just play your normal game. Um, so I do think the quality of what we saw on the field. If you look back at full match replays, and there's loads of them about. Um, you honestly will see the intensity and the intent with players just to not be cagey, but to go out and actually win the game in the 90. You don't want to, you want to go out and win. And yes, there's a bit of expectation and pressure, but this is why teams like Coventry City and Wigan Athletic do what they do as the underdog, not expected to do anything because they've never won a trophy before, and they go out and they go, "Sod it, we're not expecting them to go out and play." I think the Arsenal Hull one in recent times was quite a good one because even though it goes to extra time and Aaron Ramsey scored the winner, Hull were 2-0 up. Arsenal had to dig deep and play that day. Greatest, bugger me. That's a hard one, that. Um, that for me is a hard one. I couldn't really say I've got a greatest one. I just think the quality of play makes the ones in the 90s and the 2000s much more enjoyable to watch. Just as a fan, just enjoyable to watch. I think the first one at the Millennium Stadium where Michael Owen beats Liverpool with his goal scoring against Arsenal is quite a good one. Um, that's one that sticks in the memory. Um, I think Arsenal beating Southampton sticks in the memory because I wanted Southampton to win. I'd followed Southampton on their FA Cup run to that final. I went to every game apart from the semi-final and the final that Southampton played in that FA Cup run. So I had a little bit of a bit of bias there. Plus my cousin and the uncle are Southampton fans as well. And I'd been on that FA Cup kind of journey, even though I'm a Blackburn fan, with Southampton that season on their route to their most recent final in the FA Cup. I think they had a very good chance of winning that one. I think, yeah, Liverpool West Ham was quite memorable because both sides just went at it. Neither side could gain dominance, and it went down to the shootout. And poor Shaka Hislop. Oh, God. Poor Shaka Hislop. Obviously, had to go face England in the World Cup a month or so later. Shaka Hislop was a brilliant goalkeeper. I've got to do a career video on Shaka Hislop because he really is a cult hero for English football fans. I loved Shaka Hislop. He was a brilliant goalkeeper, underrated goalkeeper. And Trinidad and Tobago's greatest ever player. But that's my personal opinion on Shaka Hislop. But without Shaka Hislop, West Ham don't make. I think the quarter final in 2001, where Paolo Di Canio scores against Manchester United at Old Trafford, and Barthez has the hand in the air for the offside, and Di Canio goes, "Whistle hasn't gone. I'm going to score." Um, um, in regards to I've mentioned the FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley, and I've mentioned Wembley in a lot of videos in regards to attendance not being great at games. Doesn't matter what the sport is. A lot of criticism there, and I do agree. Take them away from Wembley, back to neutral grounds. I wouldn't say have them at the Millennium Stadium. No, I think neutral grounds, neutral venues. Um, it's doable. It is doable. Other sports and other leagues have shown at the last minute that they can prepare for playoff finals and playoffs and arena switches quite capably. It's just because the FA want to make money, and they've stuck to this F Wembley semi-final onwards for a variety of reasons that don't. And they try. Look, bear in mind the FA tried to flog Wembley to calm the owner of Fulham 5 years ago. The FA are asset rich, cash poor. They spent all that money on St George's Park. They spent all that money on Wembley with taxpayer assisted funds, so they couldn't afford it all themselves. And what you get is a soulless stadium, personally. And yeah, I'm not a fan of the new Wembley. I don't think it's a great stadium. It's got issues, but it is what it is. Oh look, I think look, as I said when it came to the Challenge Cup final, and look, I want to see the London Broncos back in Super League. I would love to see the London Broncos. I think they have played a couple of Challenge Cup finals and semi-finals. I would love to see the London Broncos play in a Challenge Cup final. I would happily have that at Villa Park or St James's Park or Old Trafford or one of the stadiums in the Midlands or up north, and I would happily travel for that. And I'm a Southerner, and I'm saying that Wembley does not work for the Challenge Cup final. Wembley does not work for the FA Cup semi-final. Wembley doesn't really work right now for the FA Cup final. Look, it doesn't even work for the playoff finals. Um, I you see it in my rewatch my match reviews, and you'll see me go, it's noticeable again, empty seats. And I've been mentioning this now for several years. I know COVID and the cost of living crisis and the economic situation does have an impact. We have issues with strikes in the public sector, in the transportation network. That does have an impact completely. Like this weekend, there's rail strikes. Next weekend, I've got a Friday and the Monday off. So I have a 4-day weekend next weekend. Now, I want to travel and see my friends. I want to do, get some bits and pieces for the flat, do some shopping basically. I can't do that because there's no transport available. It limits my options to travelling on days that I don't want to travel, which is a Friday and a Monday, which is more expensive if you take it by train rather than a Saturday because peak travel tickets are a thing. And it does, it is frustrating. Now, factor that in if you're a northerner, and I know that Hockey Fights UK. I don't know even. I believe you're from Sheffield. Imagine if again Sheffield United they made a semi-final last season in the FA Cup, and they are a well-supported club. There's not let's not make any bones about it. Sheffield United have a big fan base. So does Sheffield Wednesday, ironically, as well. They have both got big fan bases. Now, Sheffield is a sports mad city. Sports mad city. I am surprised with the Challenge Cup final. Normally, you would have the two clubs involved with their fan bases, and then fans of the other rugby league clubs across the country. From not just the north of England, but we've got rugby league fans in the south. I am one going to Wembley. Just didn't have that. There was half the upper tiers empty. The cameras try and hide it with their positioning. The FA are very, very, the FA as the owners of Wembley are a bit cheeky with that. The RFL are a bit. Put the empty seats up here. The seats that were occupied, the gaps between them, very obvious. Lots of empty seats, and it's just not a good look. Not a good look. Not a good look. But and it did bore out in the TV, coverage. Noticeable. Can't hide empty seats. Cannot hide it. I think, yeah. And also, yes, I would make format changes to the FA Cup with the big clubs entering the first round, all the Football League sides entering the first round, including the Premier League. I would do that. I don't. I know the magic of the third round is peak TV viewership outside of the latter stages where the big clubs play in the quarterfinal, semis, and final. But I would throw in the Premier League and Football League sides in the first round. Obviously, scrapping replays entirely is a thing, but it's a topic of discussion. It does hurt the lower league clubs. It does hurt the non-league clubs who need that big payday of an away day or a home fixture against a Premier League or a Championship side. I understand why they are economically important, but economics and the direction and the growth and the sport changes and the needs change, and we're having that debate about length of season. I know sport finances, certain sports are struggling financially. They've got to compete for that TV revenue or that online presence or that media presence, the corporate money. I think our emphasis on football in this country is unbalanced. I think it's the way, especially since 1992, that um, Sky and latterly BT, now TNT, and what was Satanta, and selling the games overseas, and has unbalanced the makeup of sport in this country financially. It's distorted it. It's an artificial economy. I think is a good way of talking about professional football. I think it has hindered cricket, rugby league, ice hockey, rugby union to an extent. I think that the TV deals in place are unbalanced. I think too much money's been pumped into football. I don't think it's just a UK problem. I think that's a European issue. And other quite deserving sports that could equally use some exposure and growth have been hampered by the TV companies pumping too much interest and focus onto one sport at the expense of some other really good sports that could use some investment, or who I think possibly are more entertaining to watch. And I do think rugby league, if given the correct investment and exposure, could be massive in this country. The powers that be in the governance side of both the union and league and the TV companies, they're missing a trick here. I think rugby union financially could be better off than what it is. Again, it's the way the financial structures are in place, the TV deals in place, and of course, in my lifetime, the game has gone from amateur to professional, and they've got that wrong and all. And too much emphasis is put on international game over the club game, and the balance isn't right there. Rugby league has a way of shooting itself in the foot on a daily basis. Ice hockey could be massive in this country. It's grown massively in the last 10, 15 years. The issues that ice hockey faces is arena availability, running costs, and money. And part of that is to do with really bad media rights deals, and getting that exposure, and the national media not really giving a toss. It's niche because the media wants it to be niche because they have bet the house on football, and to a certain extent rugby union. Cricket screwed itself. That's why it's got the 100 competition no one wants apart from the ECB and some corporate sponsors. That's my view on the 100, is a sarcastic thumbs up, because it's an unnecessary competition that cricket has created to solve a problem it created. Who knew? Who knew that cutting off free-to-air coverage of a sport would harm a sport? It's amazing, that, isn't it? And then saying, giving these players multi-million-pound centralised contracts, and then cutting off the availability of casual fans to become hardcore fans because you put it behind a ever-increasing paywall that average families cannot afford. So you get that stereotype that cricket is a posh boy sport, when some of the best players this country has ever produced are from a working class. Jimmy Anderson is from Burnley. Who the hell is a snob from Burnley? That is a town with a high unemployment rate, low average wages, and high crime. That is not a posh town. Jimmy Anderson England's greatest ever player, in my opinion, the greatest ever fast bowler in history for wickets taken, not for wicket taking average, but wickets taken. I think is he now third all time on the bowling list tests for wickets taken? He's from Burnley. Steve Harmison from County Durham, like the least posh place in the world. Freddie Flintoff. Some of the greatest England players are from cricket from working class backgrounds. Yet it's got this stereotype as a posh boy sport because it's not accessible to the average fan. And that's the ECB for you. That's the Marylebone Cricket Club and the ECB again putting money, profits before people. Yes, Viaplay that will potentially be leaving. Yeah, Viaplay have, I think, the Elite League. The NIHL, I think, some great hockey played there, but again, it's money. Money is what's hurting British ice hockey. It's not the lack of players. It's not the lack of fans. It's the lack of exposure, and with that comes lack of money. I'd much rather go see a British domestic ice hockey game than a Premier League football match. And even then, it's pricey for me to do. My nearest fully professional team now is a toss up between Guildford, who play in the Elite League, and the Bees that now play up in Slough, formerly obviously in Bracknell. They're my two local teams. Basingstoke haven't got a team this year. The other two teams that are local to me, is just getting there. And most of the time, games take place on Saturday and Sunday. And guess what? Rail strike. So when the season, I think pre-season's already started, but when regular season starts, I can't get to a game because I can't get home. I can't get there or get home. I could walk it. Fantastic. I'll be walking for 5 hours. But that's the problem. If you don't have a vehicle, which I don't have at the moment, and you're relying on public transport, then not only are you getting priced out of getting to watch your team play or your local teams play, and if you don't support them, I'll still go down the spectrum and watch a Flames game. I'll go as a neutral and enjoy the occasion of watching top level ice hockey in this country. If you're relying on public transport, half the time we've got engineering works, and the other half the time we're on strike. So that's taking a portion of potential fans out of it, going to games, impacting, getting to games. We saw it at the Challenge Cup final. Yes, there was that fatal accident on the M1, and of course, some rugby league fans were caught up in it. That contributed to even further empty seats at Wembley. So we're going back on ourselves here is make it more accessible. And it's just, yeah, I think we do have a lot debating length of season. I think European ice hockey gets their seasons right with the amount of games played. I think that's a decent amount of games. It's decent quality play across all the leagues in Europe. It's decent, really decent quality. And there's some ex-NHLers and some NHL prospects playing in these leagues. I think European football definitely gets the length of its seasons wrong, and I think European rugby union's getting the length of seasons wrong. Rugby league, the Challenge Cup should not be mid-season. How you would then structure that alongside Super League, I don't know. How many league games is acceptable? Christ, what is that on top of or not including cup competitions? Because I would say, you play each other home and away, once each. Just the league. If that's the case, then Scottish football's screwed then because we play each other 4 times rather than twice. That's where I would say merge the top 2 flights of Scottish football into one league. I think therefore it would be hard. I would say play home and away. That's it. Then you look at the various other cup competitions, their importance and how much they actually impact fixture congestion, and then you've got to look at size of league. I think the leagues themselves, as we have currently, are the right size for the 4 leagues we have in English football. I think they are the right size and balance. It's the it's the group stages of the Champions League, Europa League, and Europa Conference League that cause all the problems, and then you talk about fixture pile up and fixture congestion, and then if you're a club in the bottom half of the table, this is where the replay's going. I think benefits them. You lose that, fixture congestion. Um, I would also say bring back the reserves. Who knew that having players who are fully match fit and ready to play in the senior side would be a bad thing? Who knew getting rid of that would be a problem with injury build up and squad depths being tested, and then managers complaining about fixture congestion because they've got no players to call up to the senior squad because they're all bloody injured, and having capped squad sizes, which was a reactionary response to the financial crisis of 2008. There's been some pretty poor short-sighted decisions taken by governing bodies of sport over many years. This isn't just an English football problem or a Scottish football problem where the lack of competitiveness in the Scottish league, or rugby union's issues. This is sports governance across the board has made some very short-sighted decisions where they've chased the profits over people. They've got money first, and they've ballsed up a lot of things. Um, I don't necessarily agree with an 18-team league necessarily. It's just getting the start date of the season and the finish date of the season right, and balancing the cup competitions. That should all be straight knockout. Just let's be clear on that, straight knockout, like they were pre 1999. And this is where UEFA have had a big part to play in the balls up, which is club football. I've got no issue with them expanding the Euros and the World Cup expanding. I've got no issue with that. I really don't. I don't mind that. I like international sport. I like international sport like World Cups and Euros. I don't mind that. I love international team sport. I do, because it's refreshing, because you get to see players you wouldn't normally see. Club sport, apart from, I would say, the NHL and the NRL, to me, regular season, I don't watch. Partly because the various governing bodies, be it nationally or regionally, have completely balls things up. Um, um, completely balls things up. But that again is a debate, which we can have, the club country debate. Um, and again, TV deals and paywalls and subscription TV and streaming services, and then the whole media makeup. We can rip off. Well, I haven't got any hair left once I've shaved it all off, but I can rip my beard out if you want. But that is a debate we could um, we could have. But we can look at historical decisions taken, like the German league going. We want an 18-team league at the moment. We think that works best for our player depth and the amount of talent we have in the German system. That was a decision that all the clubs decided would benefit Germany and their domestic structures, because of how once you get below a certain level, it goes to regional leagues and their depth. And in Germany, things are very, very different on a sports point, because you do have the ice hockey, the DHL, which is a very competitive league with a lot of depth in it. You do have a lot of motorsport. You do have a lot of sports which make up, the German sporting landscape. It's the same in France. Football isn't actually as popular as people think. Rugby union and rugby league are quite popular, and then you've got the alpine sports, and so the makeup in France and Germany is different to the makeup here, with people going to games, people playing games, the amount of registered players and clubs and leagues, the regional leagues. It is different, um, and so that has a bearing on how you structure your league systems and the amount of money available in the league systems. Um, I wouldn't say we're biased. I think we do have the most registered clubs and players, apart from, I think, Brazil maybe, and I think the growth in the US is different, but they have a different, obviously, structure with the NCAA and minor leagues and affiliates and draft system. But I think in the footballing world, I think us and Brazil, I think, have the most clubs, registered clubs and leagues and player depth and amateur clubs. And I think us and Brazil, I think, lead the way. I think Italy has the most playing pitches per head per capita. Every village in Italy has a football pitch. I think, yeah, it's very obvious that, I mean, every village has, I think, a pub team. there's at least a pub team in every village in this country at some point has had a pub team. I think us, Brazil, Italy's got a lot of infrastructure in place. I think Spain's got a lot of infrastructure in place. Um, Germany's got a lot of infrastructure in place. It's very noticeable that the successful leagues and the successful nations who seem to make latter stages of tournaments and win club tournaments uh, tend to have a lot of grassroots amateurs and youth setups and also playing through the education system as well. I wouldn't say we're biased. I wouldn't say we're biased, but we have the more professional depth league-wise, I think, outside of Brazil. But Brazil's got a massive double the population we do. Um, I think Brazil's got like 150 million people. We've got like 70. So Brazil has roughly double the population we do over a massive area. But the majority of Brazil's football is in Sao Paulo and Rio. Is the and I think Recife. I think Brasilia has a proportion of clubs, but most of the Brazilian elite level is in Sao Paulo and Rio. Okay, so their population is massively blue. I think it's four. Okay, in that case, it's 4 times bigger than what the UK has. I'm talking about all of the UK, includes Wales and Scotland, and even to a sense of Northern Ireland. That's 4 times our population size. That's a fair point. But for per capita heads, not every city in Brazil has an elite level set of clubs. Um, and rugby union has a good following. Volleyball has a good following. Futsal. A lot of other sports do also have a fair following in Brazil because of the makeup of the country. It's an immigrant-based country. People from all over the world have moved to Brazil over generations. And much like North America, South America is very, very similar, with a lot of Europeans coming over. And not all Europeans play football. A lot play basketball. A lot play field hockey or roller hockey rather than ice hockey. But you get the idea here. Motorsport has a big following in Brazil. So it does the sporting impact. But Brazil, football in Brazil is like a religion. It's like rugby league and AFL in Australia is like a religion. It's like rugby union, rugby league in New Zealand. It's like a religion. It's like ice hockey in Canada. It's a staple. At some point, 7 out of 10 children play ice hockey in Canada, at least for a season. So 70% of Canadians have played ice hockey at some point, organised in their lives. That is ridiculous. There's a reason why Canada is the best team, best nation in ice hockey historically, and why the best players are Canadian. Who knew? 70% of Canadians played the sport at some point. Who knew that they would be the best team in the world? It's ridiculous. So sporting culture has something to do with it. Yeah, look, I mean, yes, the 7-1 obviously, is the exception rather than the rule. But then Brazil beat Italy 4-1 in the final in 1970. It you know, Italy have won 2 more World Cups since then. Brazil have only won 1 more World Cup. No, 2 more. Italy and Brazil have won the same amount of World Cups since 1970. I think Italy have been in more finals since 1970 though, in the World Cup. So it swings and roundabouts. Germany, I don't think, have actually recovered since that win. They've had a real that was their high point. They've not been at the same level since, in the 9 years since. And next year will be 10 years. Next year is 10 years since that 7-1. Germany aren't even on the same level. Yeah, no, Italy missing 2 World Cups is bizarre. And by their standards, that is what's going on here. And questions do need to be asked. Absolutely. Yeah, they win the Euros. Not that long ago. 2 years ago, they won the Euros. A year later, they missed it. It's just. I mean, they're probably qualified for the Euros now and defend their title, knowing Italy. This is. Are they peaking at the wrong time? Again, you look at Mancini though, and his relationship with Vialli and Vialli's past. Gianluca Vialli had a big imprint as the assistant to Mancini with that team. that is what is very noticeable. The loss of the Ali as a person, not just as a coach, from that setup has had a massive impact. It's definitely impacted Mancini, but then you've got the ongoing investigation into Man City's dealings off the field, which involve Mancini. There's a lot going on with Mancini, but it just proves how important having a good supporting cast of assistant coaches is, because Gianluca Vialli is key, absolutely key to the success of Italy at the Euros 2 years ago. Cannot be overstated. That is a key piece is missing from the coaching setup. But also, you look at it, they've missed the last two World Cups, but they win the Euros in between. They are peaking at a certain point, which is clear and obvious. They are peaking at that time. So make of that what you will. Italy tend to peak every decade and a half since 1970. Since 1970, they peak every decade and a half. They make a final. So 1970, 1982, noticeable. 1990, they have a really good run. That's within a decade. 2000, they get to another final. And then 2006, they win the World Cup. That's 6 years, but they win. And they then win the Euros in 2021, which would have been 2020. So it's very noticeable within a decade, every decade or so, Italy seems to have a decade and a half, Italy peak. And then they have a downswing and they struggle and they peak again. It's very cyclical with Italians. So basically every playing generation, basically, they'll have a core of players who are part of the leadership, and then old players retire, new players come in. I think that's sort of the Italian mantra is roughly every decade to decade and a half, roughly. Sometimes a bit less than that, but roughly they hit the top. But they were one of the best sides from 1970 all the way through till 2010. And I'm not joking. Consistency. Same with the Germans from 2000 till 2014. Just insane. And then, but then you look, USA '94. That's the Premier League's in its infancy. The European ban on English clubs playing in Europe is still actually in effect, and you can see the knock-on impact that then has with English clubs not being allowed to play in Europe has on the quality of domestic football in this country. It obviously clearly we had some great players who weren't bettering themselves because they're not playing against the European opposition at club level, and we had a lot of top quality England players at various stages in their career playing in Europe to just have that imprint on them. And also the club game was in crisis financially. The Premier League, ironically, yes, it could debate the pros and cons of the Premier League, but actually the stadium infrastructure was a mess. Attendances weren't great. The game was at a low ebb. Really, even with all the success of Liverpool and Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest in the 80s and Everton, the game was at a low ebb, ironically. Wasn't in a good place. Even with the domestic and European success of clubs before the European ban, things weren't great. Things weren't great with the finances of the game. The hooligan element obviously being an issue, always has been. Stadium infrastructure being the stadium's terrible. I remember going to Anfield. My first ever game was going to Anfield in '96, and they were starting to invest in the stadium. Bear in mind how successful Liverpool have been for 20 years. They were only just starting to really, really invest in Anfield. No, you can and you can't. You can. Well, they're going to the Russians, and some of the Russian clubs have had some great historical nights in Europe. So Russia, you can. It's happening right now with Belarus and Russia. I mean, admittedly, the Russian clubs are on the same level they were in the '90s, and even in the Soviet era. However, it's happening now to another two nations are having this European ban. So you can imagine in regards to the uproar from the Premier League clubs, um, well, St. Petersburg have had success. Dynamo Kiev have had success back in the day when they were a Soviet club. Are they missed or not? I don't know. I mean, some Russian clubs have had some fun, Shakhtar Donetsk, Ukraine. Some of the Russian or former Soviet clubs have had great success in Europe. They've had some great players play for them. Are they missed though? Well, I mean, you know, I think I think the last 15 years haven't been great for club football in Europe. Personally, I think the direction we're taking is not great. I think it's the same clubs that make the finals now, whereas before it was a bit more of a lottery. You made a final, a bit more competitive to make a final. But no, there is that that international ban pretty much on Russian and Belarusian athletes and teams competing at events, be it internationally or at club level. Are they missed? It's debatable. Um, there's been some great European success historically, some great European nights and record-breaking nights with clubs from uh, you know, um, but it is what it is. At, 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 at at the end of the day, there's obviously that ban in place. We've had it, um, and the Russians are now having it for different reasons, but it's in place. So we can debate that whether there's uproar. Obviously, the media wants you to believe us. The mainstream media wants you to uh, believe that. Well, the European clubs not winning anything. Well, say that the Star Bucharest fans back in the day, or Zenit St. Petersburg fans back in the day, not that long ago, in my lifetime, have won the top two European club competitions. I think the Cup Winners' Cup was won. I think the Cup Winners' Cup's been won by Russian or Soviet era clubs. So, um, again, you know, that's historically. We can look into the history, you know, when I do the club histories of other clubs outside of Western Europe, at least. But success has been had by clubs from Eastern Europe historically, and yeah, the UEFA coefficient I think hampers that and damages that. I think you know um, the the financial state where obviously there's a bias towards the big five. You could argue the big seven if you count the Dutch and the Portuguese leagues in the top level of the professional leagues in Europe, which wasn't always the case. I think we can argue whether Eastern European sport or football clubs can be successful again. We could argue that, but I think this is where UEFA got their structures of European club football wrong, massively, massively wrong. Um, and the UEFA coefficient is part of that. Again, profits over people, and the way that the club game is structured with the group stage, where these dead rubbers are played, where games don't mean anything. You lose some of that magic of Rangers making what was the UEFA Cup final against Zenit St. Petersburg back in 2008. You lose that, and yes, they have made another European final since then, but you lose that kind of journey that I went on with as a neutral following Rangers. I thought, hang on a second, we've got a British club in a European final for the first time in a long time, and yes, they're a big club in Scotland, but they're not an English club, but they're a British club which has got a big fan base, most successful club in their league, and the final's been played in a British city. You don't get that. You just don't get that. I have heard, Rangers PSV was good. I've heard that if you're an Aston Villa fan, beating Hibs away at Hibs at Easter Road was apparently a good game. Villa really put a thumping on a Hibs side that had a fantastic two-legged affair against Servette from Switzerland. That was apparently a very feisty encounter, a very enjoyable encounter if you're a neutral. But again, you've got these European qualifying rounds. How early does the club season need to start before we look at how late the club season has just finished to go, we are getting things wrong here. UEFA are getting things wrong here. And then you add in the talk about this European Super League. UEFA have got their own plans for a Super League idea that they've had sort of looking into researching for. I think, Jesus Christ. Ugh. And when the same clubs are playing each other quite regularly in these qualifying rounds, or coming up against each other in the group stages all the time. It's like, how many times do these clubs have to? And it's always the same clubs that seem to reach the last stages of tournaments. And you're going, what is the point of a club qualifying for this Conference League, Europa League, or Champions League if it's the same handful of clubs that are contesting the latter stages every bloody season? You know, you can pick out about 1 out of 10 clubs that are going to be in the finals. There's your finals. Here's your clubs. Here's your selection of clubs that are going to make these finals. And it's just like, is there a point? Because they put the profits over people. And it's the way UEFA and the domestic leagues have marketed themselves to the North American market initially, and now to the Asian market as well, that I think has contributed to the reduction in the competitiveness of club football. And then they don't like it when the underdog team, like a Leicester City, for example, wins a league title, or St Johnstone win a cup double in Scotland. They don't like that because that's not a very marketable club, apparently, even though it's a fantastic story. And what St Johnstone did in winning a cup double a couple of years ago, really upsetting the old firm, was fantastic. And I thought that's just some bright, some green shoots here. We could see a resurrection of Scottish football if we have, more competitiveness. Yeah, it wasn't the last. No, I wouldn't have any. I would get rid of the group stages. It's just a money making ploy. It's a corporate decision, which is again, as I say, profits over people. There has to be a point where you make a little bit less money, but you make the product more enjoyable. At which point it's more competitive. At which point, ironically, in the long term, you get more investment because multiple clubs are winning, and it's different clubs winning, which then suddenly means you can grow the fan bases even bigger overseas. In those overseas markets outside of Europe, we go, actually, we've got some new names in the final, the latter stages, and suddenly we're seeing all their merchandise as well as the merchandise of the established. It blows your mind. That short-term gain over long-term gain is what we're seeing. Very short-sightedness by the governing bodies. Very short-sightedness. And they've gone over, they've just chased the money. They've chased the money. And then we have all these corruption scandals. We've got players under investigation, like Paqueta under investigation for betting irregularities. We've got match fixing scandals out of our arsehole. Same with snooker. They've really saturated it with quantity over quality, and it's just gone. I think UEFA got their strategy wrong, but they caved into club boards and club owners and club chairmen who wanted to make money. They saw that satellite TV, pay-per-view TV, and then now obviously internet streaming, but via play. Obviously, they saw that there was going to be a massive explosion in revenues, and they wanted to double down on that. And so UEFA have basically been a weak governing body for 30 years. And I think we're too far down the track. I think there's going to come a point where the false economy, in this case, but rugby union's having it as well, where things are starting to collapse. The false economy really starts, the money bubble, the false economy built upon debt and short-term profiteering, overinflated salaries, obscene transfer. You could buy countries for some of the transfer fees, by the way. You could actually buy a mortgage on a country. Ironically, we're talking about property. It's gone wrong. It's gone wrong, and we're too far down the track now, unless it really suddenly collapses on itself. And now the Saudi money's here, and the Qatari money's here, and the Dubai money's here, and it's completely distorted what should be ultimately profitable industry, which is professional. Sport should make money. It's a license to print money, but what they've done is they profits aren't truly there. And what those who own the teams and own clubs and own leagues, what they're not telling us is how actually reliant they are on us as fans going to games, buying the merchandise. And COVID exposed that. COVID exposed that. Back, I think it was the 2016-2017 season or 2015-2016 season. So not long before the channel starts up, a survey was done, and the Premier League clubs basically said they could let the fans in, all fans, home or away, for £10 or less, or even free, because they made enough money they made so much money from the TV deals that we could go in for next to nothing. It turns out that was a lie. Turns out the clubs were telling porkies, and now what we've seen is some of the owners being dodgy as well. Some really bad corporate decisions and some bad debts that have been exposed by economic shutdowns and economic downturns. Who knew that unscrupulous owners and weak governance? Who knew there'd be money problems? It's the same in rugby union. Wasps were in money problems long before COVID because of the move to Coventry. That's my sarcastic thumbs up for brain dead decisions. London Irish didn't have a home ground, and Worcester just were trying to stay competitive. And then COVID, they were a gate-driven club. They had limited revenues, but basic rugby union is a smaller version of football, but it's been exposed more heavily to economic shocks outside of sport that have a knock-on impact, with fans going to games, fans being able to afford merchandise, tickets, season tickets, and really bad TV deals with media companies that lose money, like BT Sport and Viaplay, who seem to be wanting to pull out of the UK market, yet they've got the UEFA conference. I don't get that. I've seen a lot of ads for TNT Sports, the rebranded BT Sport. They're really going hard on the advertising, and it's putting me off the product even more. Why would I want to buy something that is just a rebranded turd? You can only polish a turd so much, which is you can't, and cover it in glowy, sprinkly sparkles, which makes it look even more hideous. Before you go, this product is shit. There's a reason why I didn't have it in the first place. It's not going to sell now. I can see TNT Sports being even more of a disaster than BT Sport was. What do Dundee and Dundee United have in common in European competition? They both lost a European final. They both lost the UEFA Cup final, I think. Well, they're the first clubs from the same city to both lose the same final. I've done the club histories on both. I should know this. I know they're the first two. I think they're the first two. I think they're the first clubs to have the same firm. I know they have the same football firm, or Ultras. What do they? Jesus, didn't they lose? Right, am I the? Oh yeah, well, that's actually not surprising. Celtic, I've also done it as well in group stages, home and away. So actually, that's not as surprising as you think. It's obviously surprising, yes, but it's not as surprising as you think, because when Dundee and Dundee United were actually good sides who actually won trophies back in the 70s and the 80s, Barcelona, are they though, or is it just money and city they play in, and the uncompetitiveness, the financial weakness of the Scottish league? Because Dundee and Dundee United back in the day were good. They had some stacked teams back in the day. Like, when I say stacked teams, they were stacked teams. But Scottish football in the 70s and 80s, you look at it, and it was like, wow, this they've got, look at, ooh. And then you actually look at international call-ups and where players are playing from, and international appearances and goals per game and minutes played per the Dundee sides and Aberdeen and Falkirk. You're like, oh, there are other clubs outside Glasgow who play football in Scotland, and they're good. They're actually really good. Oh, me, the Dundee sides in the 70s and 80s were stacked. The Scottish national side, you could select from both Dundee clubs, and it'd still be a good side that was better than England at the time. Scottish football was good in the decade before I was born, and then suddenly, it wasn't. And a part of the problem is they're not. Scotland isn't producing world class players. There's the occasional he's bloody good, but it's just not on the same level as what it was. The investment's dried up. The competitiveness of the league. I've got to do some more club history videos in Scotland because there's some good clubs. Like there's some great clubs in Scotland. I've got to do some videos on like Falkirk. They've actually had some success. I've done Motherwell. I've got to do Hibs and Hearts, and then you'll see how Scottish football is really just nowhere near where it needs to be. And it was, and I tell you now, in the years before I was born, Scottish football, there was some of those teams. They were stacked for their era. They were absolutely stacked. Even Hibs back in the day. They played in the inaugural European Cup competition. They were the best team in Scotland when it was first played. So that's thinking, oh yeah, in the late 50s, Hibs were bloody good. And you would have to ask your dad and your granddad about how stacked that Hibs side was in the late 50s, 36. That was ridiculous. The Lisbon Lions, yes, they were all born within 20 miles of like, Celtic Park. And they were a mixed Catholic and Protestant. I think Rangers had a rule in place where they wouldn't sign a Catholic player until the 80s. I think, and there were still many in the boardroom who were stubborn until the 90s with that one. If Robin Leonard returns from his health issues this year, what do you think they should do with their goal situation to Thompson, Hill, and him? They just want a Stanley Cup. It's a nice headache to have, but it could actually have negative impacts on the team. That's a watch this space. He may be medically retired because he's obviously got his health issues. It's just a thing. While Wolverhampton Wanderers know as well because it's their nickname. Their logo is a wolf's head. Wolverhampton, you shorten it, it's Wolves. Yeah, there's a few teams called Wanderers. It's just a nickname that's stuck. And that's why they're called Wolves. And the website calls them Wolves. It's a club nickname. Obviously, fans associate as a shortened version of Wolverhampton. Wolverhampton, Black Country. It's just a nickname. It's like you've got, a couple of athletics and a couple of Wanderers as and a lot of Uniteds and Cities, and then you look at Everton, Toffees, work that one out. Man United, Red Devils, even though the devil on the logo is sometimes black, it's sometimes red, depends on the era. You've got Millwall and Chelsea have similar logos with a lion. It really is an interesting one. But no, it's just a nickname. It's stuck. The Baggies. Why West Brom called the Baggies? And why? They've got a wren on a hawthorn bush, hence why the stadium is known as the Hawthorns. Why are they called the Baggies? Work that one out. And I have done the club history of West Bromwich Albion. Why are Reading called the Royals? They play in the Royal County of Berkshire. So that there are, Yeovil are called the Glovers. Luton are called the Hatters because the industries in the area. You've got Walsall are called the Saddlers because the saddle making industry. It's Morecambe are called. Is it Morecambe or Fleet are called the Shrimpers because the shrimp logo? I mean, some of them just. It is what it. Tottenham Hotspur is because the Hotspur, one of the noble knights of the Middle Ages, had land near White Hart Lane. That's what they're called, Hotspur Spurs. Cobblers, yeah, there's loads. There are loads of nicknames, and a lot of it's to do with the local area. So Walsall being the saddlers, saddle making industry. Aston Villa, or Aston's the area of Birmingham they play in. The Holt family gave the land for Villa Park to be built. Yet they're called the Villains because Villa being a Latin word for house. Holt End, the big house. See where I'm getting at with some of these nicknames? They have a reason why. Wolverhampton Wanderers, Wolves is just short for Wolverhampton. Really, it's just a nickname, and it suits Wolves. It does. Um, and yeah, Bolton and Wolves. Yeah, there are various reasons why nicknames, and Wolves do wander around an area. Think of it. Think of nature. Wolves hunt in packs. They'll have a wide range, and they don't settle in one particular area. They constantly are on the move, following their prey. There you go. Um, yes, a lot of English players did play, not just for Celtic and Rangers, but other clubs in Scotland as well. And that's in part, again, that European club ban. They wanted to play European club football. And the European club ban, because of Hazel, meant players migrated for a decade. It wasn't just Rangers and Celtic, all the Scottish clubs have English players, because you could have that opportunity to play European club games in the UEFA Cup, Cup Winners' Cup, and the European Cup, which you couldn't get with English clubs. That's why clubs like Luton, Oxford, couldn't maintain their success they had by winning the League Cup, or the League Cup success that they had. And they got relegated out of the top flight because they lost a lot of the good players. They just couldn't keep them. They couldn't maintain it because the lure of European football meant players were like, well, I'm going to sign up in Scotland because I'll have a chance of a club winning a trophy in Scotland, going over to Europe, playing against the European opposition, and then getting seen by a European club, getting seen by a national manager, and getting selected. Um, I think you're right there. A lot of this is why I got to do Hibs and Hearts, because the Edinburgh derby is nasty. Hibs hate each other. Um, So, and I've done my club history of St Johnstone, and they broke the cup dominance of the old firm by winning the cup double a couple of seasons back. And I think that's when I said, "Oh, the Euros are coming." Steve Clarke, first appearance at that tournament since '98, and it just didn't work. Yes, Warrington, they're known as the Wire. They have a wolf again. Warrington having a really Warrington are gonna have Sam Burgess as their coach next year. Could have made that one up. And they are having a tough season. But they got a key win against Hull, so got a key win today. But yeah, the Wire. Some clubs have some really bizarre nicknames. When I did my video on Boavista, and then as the checkered ones, it's because they're kit. Being a checkerboard, kind of like a chessboard or a kitchen floor. Warrington's Cheshire, so it's Cheshire. Cheshire. Think of Gary Barlow. That's the best way to describe, or Robbie Williams. Think of their accent, and that's what Warrington sounds like. It's not quite Midlands, and it's not quite North, and it's just causing your ears just to slightly bleed, but it's not as bad as Dudley in the West Midlands, where you want to have a brain tumour, and it's not as scratchy as a Scouse accent, where you want to just blow your brains out, and it's not as comical as a Geordie accent, but it's enough to give you a migraine. That's the best way to describe a Cheshire accent. It's not bad, it's not good, but it's just enough to make you have that nervous twitch going, please shut up now. Think Gary Barlow and Robbie Williams from Cheshire, Stoke Way, Staffordshire. That's sort of what Warrington sounds like. It's not quite as annoying as a Scouse accent, comical as a Geordie accent, or as depressing as a West Midlands Brummie accent, but it's bad enough. That's the best way I can describe a Cheshire accent. It makes you want to be depressed, but not enough to seek therapy. So it's more like trigger borderline alcoholism, alcohol dependency, but it's not enough. That's my humour to it. I shouldn't really make this out of addiction, but I can, because I'm an ex-addict, and it's kind of fun to have a dark sense of humour. But that's basically what a Cheshire accent is. What stuck? Robbie Williams. He's got a posh Stoke accent, though. He's not. He's got a posh Stoke accent. That's the posh end of Stoke. But yeah, no. Stoke's just one of those. Staffordshire and Cheshire are just places where you want to break down and cry, but you can't. Yeah, Michael Owen is Chester, and Robbie Williams is Stoke. They are really. It's a mix between Black Country Brummie and that that bit just outside St Helens, in between Manchester and St Helens, where you just go. Ugh. It would be nice to see Vale City play. Yeah, it would be nice to see Port Vale and Stoke City kick lumps out of each other on a Wednesday night in the rain, in the Potteries, or at Bell Park. It'd be kind of cool. And that's one of the lesser known rivalries in English football because they've been in different leagues for so long. But that'd be kind of fun. Um, well, yeah, it's a suburb, but it's just the River Dee. It's how boundary changes affect because local councils, and local government acts, But Chester's a border city; it always has been. It was a fortified position in Roman times, in Saxon, Anglo-Saxon kind of post-Roman Britain, when it was actually part of Mercia, which is an Anglian kingdom. Angles, they're different tribe to Saxons. When it was part of ancient Mercia, which is a medieval kingdom, early medieval kingdom before Anglo-Saxon becomes obviously England. Watch Last Kingdom, you'll understand. Chester and Runcorn. Runcorn is actually a Mercian settlement. When people say Mercia, don't you mean West Mercia, which is Birmingham? No, Mercia was an ancient kingdom um, in what is now obviously England, in the Midlands. East Anglia is the East Angles. So the Angles were one of the invading people before the Vikings. The Saxons were also an invading people before the Vikings, and the Jutes were invading people. Similar part of the world to the Dane Vikings, Denmark and Northern Holland, and that bit of Germany. That's Hamburg, basically, Bremerhaven and Kiel. So basically, that's the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons are from that bit of Holland that's on the coast to Denmark, basically. Very similar to the Danish Vikings that come over a few centuries later. They're all basically cousins, basically. And that's a thing, by the way. And they're all warlike peoples. Anyway, um, they all like hack, stab, whatever. It's we Christianized first. That's how it works with missionaries from Rome. Because oh no, the Christ is Redeemer. No, don't become religious because no, it's a way of controlling the people. Just remember that. And yeah, Chester's an interesting place. Runcorn's an interesting place. Shrewsbury's an interesting. I've been to Shrewsbury. I've been to Crewe. Never again. Um, I've been to Crewe twice. Once there, once back, just to pass through Crewe. Yes, I'm a railway nerd and I like the steam trains and all that. Got books. I wouldn't go to Crewe otherwise. Honestly, avoid Crewe. It's depressing. But I've been to that part of the world before. Um, Very interesting part of the world because you've got the Welsh kingdoms to the west, you've got Mercia, and then you have Northumbria, just the other side of the Pennines, the Peak District, basically. And then obviously you have Danelaw, and it gets complicated. But basically, Chester is a planned settlement. Runcorn's a planned settlement. Um, Runcorn is Angle, Mercian. Chester is Roman. So they're a few centuries apart, but they're planned settlements deliberately placed there for military purposes. That's the best way to describe Chester and Runcorn because the river, the Mersey and the Dee and all that, the river channels, and they were actually port cities at one point. Anyway, there you go. So, yeah. Um, West Shropshire sounds a bit well because it is. Um, because it is. Or Westbury, which is obviously in Shropshire, but their team plays in Wales. It's yeah, the Welsh Marches. I'm getting into a history lesson here. Monmouthshire was part of England at one point. Chepstow. Yeah, Ludlow and Chepstow. Yeah, just going to stick that one in there. Monmouthshire, which is just the other side of River Severn, on the Welsh side, was part of England at one point. Herefordshire, bits of Hereford were in Herefordshire were in Wales at one point, which is why Hereford as a city exists as a military fortification. I'm gonna have to do videos on these cities at some point, and these locations on the other channel. But no, Chester's interesting because part of, I think their away end or their car park of the football club is in Wales. So when COVID was an issue, could they have fans in attendance? Could they not? Could they play games? Could the players even train? Because the training ground, I think, just the whole thing was a mess there. Whoever gave planning permission for that deserves to have their head checked, Again, well, the Welsh marches, the Marcher Lords, and yeah, that gets complicated. Post-Roman Britain, it becomes a mess for about 700 years, from about the 400s till about um, 1300s. It's an absolute shambles. It is. It is an absolute shambles when the Romans leave to the Edward the First. When Wales is subjugated, and of course Edward II becomes the first Prince of Wales because all the Welsh kingdoms have been subjugated. And even then, with the Wellings Rebellion and Henry Bolingbroke, who's Henry the Fourth, Battle of Shrewsbury, it's a mess from about 400 AD to because the Romans were actually in Wales. So from the end of the Roman Britain to basically for 1,000 years, England and Wales is a shambles from the Mersey estuary, so Runcorn, all the way down to the Bristol Channel, so Monmouthshire and Bristol. That area was just a nightmare to govern. Who was in charge of what? It's like the Anglo-Scottish border north of Newcastle and Carlisle was just a mess as well. Who controlled what? When the Vikings, well, the Danes, Vikings is a term for raiding, to go a Viking. When the Danes come, the Danelaw bit, when Northumbria falls as it, Kingdom of Strathclyde and the Picts, and so basically border areas generally. So Alsace-Lorraine in France and Germany, the Saarland. There's that bit in Eupen in Belgium that speaks German. Anywhere that you've got a border region is just an absolute shambles for political geography. There's a way of looking at it. I've got new videos on this on the other channel, like the Saarland, Saarbrücken, Eupen in Belgium, and Malmedy, Luxembourg existing. Luxembourg used to be 10 times the size. It used to be bigger than Belgium. Where Burgundy was part of the Duchy of Burgundy at one point. Belgium is part of Holland, part of France, part of Germany, made into a country. Anyway. Schleswig-Holstein was part of Denmark. Germany wasn't a country until 1861. Italy wasn't technically a country until 1871, but 1861 in the place of Italy. Poland and Lithuania were one country. Well, it's just a mess. I love European history. We've spent the best part of 4,000 years killing each other. We just stopped for a little bit, and then Yugoslavia came along, and then ceased to be. Yeah, no, basically, Runcorn is a Mercian Angle settlement, and then you get uh, King Alfred's son Edward, who's the first king of England, but he's not called. I think he's called Edward the Elder, because he's the first king called Edward, and he is the first Anglo-Saxon king, because Alfred the Great was a Saxon king from Wessex, where he unites Mercia and Wessex into the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of England, but doesn't quite get Northumbria. Not quite. Edmund, his successor, is the one who truly called the first king of England, first Anglo-Saxon king of England. Watch Last Kingdom. Watch the series of Last Kingdom and the film Seven Kings Must Die. Watch the Last Kingdom series on Netflix and the film, and that is a fictional historical thing. There's history to it, but they made some historical fictional license. Ethelred, not Ethelred, he could play it. Uhtred of Bevenberg is a semi-fictional, semi-historical character because there really wasn't Uhtred of Bevenberg, but half a century later than the actual one depicted in the film and TV series. The Saxon Chronicle books by Bernard Cornwell. I've got them all, I've read them all. Watch that. But no, the segments on the Wirral, basically, Runcorn is set up as a Mercian border settlement under Ethelfled and her husband Ethelred, who's misrepresented in the Last Kingdom as a nasty piece of shit. He wasn't. He was actually a warrior, sort of semi-king, semi kind of what you class as a duke these days. And Ethelfled, Lady of the Mercians, they give a charter to set up what Runcovia or Runcorn. There used to be a Roman trading post there, but they set up Runcorn on is it the Mersey? I think it is the Mersey. Was it the Dee? They set up Runcorn is an Angle settlement, so Mercia. It becomes very important as a defensible settlement where tolls were collected, and also it was a military fortification. The other side of that is Danelaw. There are settlements on the Wirral. That's to do with what's the battle in Last Kingdom? One at the end. Yeah, so basically the border areas of Danelaw and Mercia um, are basically there's anywhere north of the Thames, basically, and the Severn. So part of what was historically Mercia and bits of Northumbria. Those border areas they become blurred, so that's why King Canute comes along, and then you have the Danish Saxon Angle kind of intermarriage between people, and hence why King Canute, hence why Harold Godwinson, who is actually related to Edward the Confessor as well as William the Conqueror, hence why you get a Dano-Anglo-Saxon mixed Norman kind of William the Conqueror comes along, because there's intermarriage between the various. Because you've got Hath Canute, who's his son, and then you have Edmund Ironside, who sort of steps on a. It gets weird in the decades before William the Conqueror. It gets a bit blurred when you have got Harold Harefoot, you have Harold Hardrada's relate. They're all by this point all the various Danes, Saxon, Angle, and Norman dukes and kings and warlords are all related at this point. And a lot of their soldiers and their citizens are all related, especially on the river valleys and the border areas like the Wirral, like the Thames, north of London. It gets a bit fudged. It gets a bit fudged. The Welsh are still way less. They're busy with their sheep. So anywhere west of the River Severn, they're Welsh. They're being Welsh, and the River Dee and the Wirral. They're being very Welsh, very Celtic. Cornwall, basically anywhere west of Plymouth, is similar to the Welsh. They're Corn Welsh, Cornwallis, so Cornwall. Hence the Cornwallis, Lord Cornwallis family. You know, Cornwallis of the American War of Independence. They're known as the Cornwallis peoples, and there's lots of tribes down there that were never really conquered by the Romans. They weren't really conquered by the Angles or the Saxons or the Welsh even. They're like Brittany or the Bretons in northwestern France. They're a separate little thing until bugger me. Until really William the Conqueror, even the Saxon kings of Wessex and the Mercian like King Offa couldn't conquer Wales or Cornwall. So anywhere west of Plymouth is weird. Cornish, weird people, weird part of the world. No offense to people from Cornwall, but it's a really weird part of the world. Like once you go down to the West Country, you're in Devon, and this is nice. Then you go to Cornwall, it's like beautiful countryside. The accent's strange. I can understand Welsh accent. I cannot understand Cornish. If someone is actually speaking a Cornish accent with Cornish words, because it's still an active language, with people actually speaking it every day, I don't have a clue what's going on. I can understand Welsh and I understand Welsh slang, and you get the Welsh words and English words getting interspersed with Welsh when they actually. I've listened to Rugby Union with Welsh commentary. It's kind of fun. It is kind of fun, and you can actually understand the Welsh equivalent of an English word going back. But hang on a second, sounds familiar that Welsh phrase for English phrase. Cornish, Davically. Lancashire and Cumbria were not sort of Welsh; they were actually more Scottish and Irish influenced, ironically. The Kingdom of Cumberland had a Hiberno Scottish, Pictish influence. They weren't, no. Kingdom of Cumbria, no, not Welsh, very Irish Celt and Pict. They were, yeah, Cumberland, yeah, no, not Welsh, still. No. Different Celts who don't like the Welsh. What is the battle in Last Kingdom, the last battle, which is the Battle of the Nations, where like you've got Saxons, Angles, Jutes, Danes, Celto Danes. So you got the Viking, well, the Danish kingdoms of Ireland, Scottish Viking. It basically anything to do with northwestern Europe and northern Europe fought in this battle. And it's peeing me off because I was watching the Last Kingdom the other day. Um, it was near the Wirral. Historical evidence points to somewhere under a golf course in the Wirral, part of Merseyside. There's a golf course, but apparently it's underneath there. And the topography works with a Strathclyde. They call it the Lost Welsh Kingdom, but in reality, it's more of a Lost Pictish Kingdom slash Scots, which come from the northern part of Ireland. The Scottish tribe come over, and I think they came over as mercenaries, and they fought against the Romans. It's a weird one. Strathclyde's a weird part of the world historically, and then you've got the Picts, and you've got the Scots who are actually Irish, and then you've got the Scottish tribes going over to Ulster, alongside Danes and Norwegian Vikings. And then you have the Shetlands and the Orkneys, and then you have Iceland and Greenland and Newfoundland. There's a reason why Newfoundland's called Newfoundland. It's because the Vikings went there for a while. They found remains in Newfoundland. Because land is a Danish word. And the Chad Boy races are out tonight with their cars. The East Angles is East Anglia. Essex is the East Saxons. Norfolk and Suffolk are the northern folk and the southern folk. The East Angles. Kent was a Jutish kingdom, so Kent is a more of a Jutland word. Really, Kent. Sussex are the South Saxons. Wessex are the West Saxons. So around London is where the Saxons start to settle. Kent and the Isle of Wight is where the Jutes settle, and the Angles first come to East Anglia and then to Mercia, and then the Northumbrians are a bit more of a weird mix of Picts, Scots, Celts, and a mixture of the Jutes, Angles, and Saxons and Danes. That's a best way to describe the post-Roman kingdoms pre-Norman conquest. I love giving these random history lessons, not sport related, but hey. And until the industrial age, the eastern side of the UK was more popular than the Midlands and London and Scotland. Norfolk and Suffolk and Lincolnshire had a massive population until the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance period, Tudor period. They were the most populous parts of the UK. You've had a couple of plagues in like the Black Death and other plagues. Would I change the borders in the UK? Yes, I'll get rid of all of them. Personally, if we're meant to be a united kingdom, how about let's get rid of all of them? Personally, but we're not really a united kingdom, really, are we? Because the Irish will hate each other, and us, and each other. The Scots are like the Irish, except they also hate the English when it comes to sport and politics. But in reality, they don't hate us, but they do hate us. The Welsh, their legal system is the English legal system. They want to hate us, but they only hate us when it comes to rugby union. Cornwall's just Cornwall, and then we all hate each other anyway. So it's like we're like the English version of France. The French don't even like each other. Hen Ogledd, that'll be Cumbria, Northumbria, and Strathclyde, and the Kingdom of the Isles, which will be Stornoway and the Hebrides. It is a country. It has its own parliament. It is a country. They have their own national anthem and flag. I don't mind. I don't. The only sport where Northern Ireland actually, outside the Commonwealth Games, where they have a national side, it actually is football. Rugby union, rugby league, cricket. They are a United Ireland team. That's a political agreement as well. There's a lot of politics with that predate the partition of Ireland. Well, the oldest rivalry in sport is England-Scotland, and I think the first ever international was it rugby union or was it football? I can't remember. I think it's rugby union, but it was just rugby before the split in the Union League, and that's England-Scotland. Well, United, the Irish don't even like each other. Just look at Limerick and Dublin. Once they don't even like each other, let alone um, it's unworkable. Really, you look at the history of Ireland. I've got to do a history video of Ireland and the Anglo-Norman Irish Lord Strongbow, basically, where we get the name Strongbow for our cider. Apples don't naturally grow in Ireland. They were imported during what's his name? Strongbow is his nickname is Strongbow because he had a fondness for archery and he was quite a strong, strapping bloke. He had a fondness for hunting with bow and arrow. He's a I think it's Henry. Is it Henry the First or Henry the Second? There's Anglo-Norman lords. So there's a bit of Saxon, Anglo-Saxon, Dane here as well. They go over after they conquer Pembrokeshire and all that. They go over to Dublin, and the Norman conquest of Ireland is different to Oliver Cromwell. The worst bit of the worst bit of British history, I think, is the Cromwellian War in Ireland, and then that's just done. Um, um, but I think with Irish history, they were disunited when the Danes came. They were fighting each other and the Danes. Battle of Clontarf, where all the Irish clans decided for once in Irish history, they've gone, we'll all fight against the Kingdom of Dublin. We'll all fight against the guys from Norway and Denmark. 1016 or 1004 or something? Battle of Clontarf. I've got to do a video on that because that is Brian Boru, brilliant, and hence my family crest. You can see that Munsterman, we're a current clan. We're Munstermen. We're High Lords of Munster at the time. That is the only time in Irish history where all of Ireland has gone. We're going to fight together against other Irish people who have been here now for 100 years and have intermarried, and they sort of speak our language with some Danish words. That's my family coat of arms, and that is an Irish coat of arms. That is the only time in Irish history where the majority of the Irish populace were united for about a decade or so, and around that period, and then it all goes to crap because they start fighting each other again. Um, the people of Connaught and what is Galway, basically the western side of the island, end up fighting people from Cork and Dublin, and then what we now call Belfast and Derry. Then the Scottish kingdoms and tribes end up basically sort of before they're part of Britain, as in the kingdom, as in the United Kingdom. Scottish kings started again allowing nobles to go over and basically pillage the north, and then they settle. You get the what they call the Scots Irish, um, and it's basically just Ireland is a historical shit show. It's so much fun to research though, because you have all these various Anglo-Irish and Scottish-Irish basically warlords who run around either as mercenaries or fighting for various kings or parliaments or armies, and they're bloody good at it. And then they fight each other, and they've been doing that. And then they realise in the 1920s, we might as well have 40 years of not killing each other. And then the troubles start, and then we have 30 more years of North and South and various communities within both countries, wanting to kill each other. And then they stop again, and there's a few still now who go, let's kill each other again. That's basically a simplified version of a very complex 3,000-year history of the history of Ireland, as Ireland. There's some great historical sites in Ireland. There's some great medieval castles. There's some great Iron Age Celtic burial mounds and archaeological sites. There's a lot of Georgian architecture from the Regency period in central Dublin. There's Dublin Castle, one of the oldest fortified sites in Ireland. But now it's different. The Dublin Castle you see now, what stands, is not the Dublin Castle that would have been there in the early Norman, 13th century. It's a completely different castle. It's got a Anglo-Norman arrival, and most of those Anglo-Normans weren't actually English lords; they were from France. And there's a lot of Welsh went over there as well as soldiers, and it's Irish history is fun. You can never get bored with Irish history because there's always someone getting brutally slain, and there's always some rebellion, uprising, warfare, and chaos and carnage. Um, some of the greatest figures in European history come from Ireland, or has spent time in Ireland. Two curious facts about Ireland. One, there are no native snake species. And two, apples aren't a native species either, they're introduced. So there's no snakes in Ireland, historically, although people have obviously had pet snakes. And zoos, obviously, zoological societies and zoos and reptile houses will have snakes. But naturally, no snakes occur in the wild, and apples are introduced. While we have the name Strongbow as a cider brand, Lord Strongbow, who was a Welsh marcher lord, that's where he decided to hack stab English lords, Welsh lords, many Welsh and English peasants, and then he decides to go over to Ireland to do a bit of bootlegging and hacking and stabbing, and he's basically just a warlord, medieval warlord, because even with kings and princes and on thrones, medieval countryside, feudal lords could be quite just like a law unto themselves. Um, yeah, no, the Welsh are an interesting bunch because northern parts of North Wales sound like they're from Cheshire or Shropshire or Liverpool, and the South Welsh, um, very anglicised with their surnames. It's the Central Wales is the interesting bit where they truly are still their origins are Welsh. That's where you get your Llewellyns. That's where you get your other um, Owains, not Owen, but Owain, which is the old Welsh spelling. That's where you get the proper Welsh surnames, Griffith, Grill Griffiths, which is Lloyd's, Llewellyns. But that's where you get your really interesting Welsh surnames. Um, that's again, as I would say, the true genetically Welsh Celtic descendants are. South Wales is basically from Pembroke all the way to the Severn Estuaries, very anglicised with English settlement following William the Conqueror. And then North Wales, there's a fair bit of Irish settlement and Danish settlement from the Viking period and Irish migration across the Irish Sea to build the railways and then in the 50s and 60s do building work. So they settled in Liverpool. So with the rise of industrialisation, so Central Wales is like Aberystwyth is where they're very Welsh. Um, Chester, Shropshire, Herefordshire are now they were part of Wales, so that improved Welsh sport to a certain extent. I think you increase the population size, yes. Would you would you put bits of Worcestershire in there? Would you put bits of Gloucestershire in there? That's an interesting one. Does it actually improve it? I would say to a certain extent, you've got a bigger talent pool to choose from, and therefore more players and more teams, or more corporate money. Does it improve it that much? I wouldn't say so. I would say it improves it to a certain extent, yes. But other than Chester and Shrewsbury and Hereford, you haven't got many massive urban areas where you have a large population suddenly being inserted in there that are historic large towns and cities. You haven't got a massive influx of a lot of corporate money. It just means you've got a few more 100,000 people, maybe an extra million people being added to the Welsh population. But in reality, um, yes, it will improve certain aspects of the player pool, the athletic talent pool you can choose from, and potential fans as well for finance. But it doesn't add too much. It just makes it a little bit better, but not by much. Fully, if you were to fully integrate Wales and Scotland into like a United Kingdom kind of thing, and you integrate the leagues and teams, then yes, that completely changes the narrative of quality, because then you have that more corporate money, that wider TV audience, both nationally and internationally, for said club. Overseas investment. That's how it's. But hypothetically, it doesn't really add too much. Okay, that means hypothetically, Michael Owen can now be a Welsh player. Jared Bowen, hypothetically, could be a Welsh player. And yes, that does improve the quality of the Welsh football team. On the rugby standpoint, Simpson Daniel, who's played for Gloucester, I think has got a Gloucestershire link. Hypothetically, if you had Gloucestershire or part of Gloucestershire to Wales, Simpson Daniel, historically, great winger back in the day for England in Gloucester in rugby union. Hypothetically, I don't think it tips the scales too much, but a little bit. I think that's where I would go with that one. I don't think there's enough population, and especially on the corporate side with the money side of things. I think with investment, I think is where we could see a certain aspect of positive change. But maybe if you add cities like Gloucester and Cheltenham and Shrewsbury and Chester and potentially Bristol. Obviously, you've added about 1 million people there, 1.5 million people there. But yeah, Phil Vickery. Yeah, if Cornwall was an independent nation, Phil Vickery would be now head coach, national captain. He was for England, though. But again, if we're trying to say, well, how can we improve Welsh sport? There has to be investment from the rest of the UK. There has to be investment from um, you know, English. There has to be more collaboration with the English FA and the Welsh FA, the RFU and the Welsh Rugby Union. There has to be more positive assistance from a wealthier organisation in the same sport with the Welsh equivalent. The only sport, team sport, professional sport in this country nationally, which has where Wales produces quality players, is ice hockey. In regards to the national setup and the top team being the Cardiff Devils. And even then, the governance is split, and funding for grassroots projects is split. And we saw that with COVID, where a lot of support was given to Wales, different levels of support was given to Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England, depending on where you were in the UK. We didn't have a UK-wide support program in place. We look 2012 Olympics. 2012 Olympics. But the problem was the community, the collaboration between the Scottish FA and the rest was a nightmare, both in the men's and women's side of things. With the Olympics, Stuart Pearce and Ryan Giggs were heavily involved with the Great Britain men's team, and then on the Britain women's side, it was heavily England dominated, but did have players from other parts of the UK also integrated with the women's Olympic football team. But Cinderford, very, very small town. Forest of Dean is a beautiful part of the country, absolutely. But again, lack of population. Does it really benefit Welsh sport by having the Forest of Dean area of Gloucestershire as part of Wales? Not a tourist hotspot. Get tourists to go there, but does it really add value on a sporting aspect for grassroots? Yeah, they're decent for the level they play at, but on a much broader standpoint, not really tipping the scales. You might have 1 or 2 players come out of the Forest of Dean area who could reach international standard in rugby union and football. But how many international players do you know from the Forest of Dean? How many international level athletes who are really world class come from the Forest of Dean outside of horse racing? Are they really sporting hotbeds, in regards to world-class talents that come out? They're not really. Well, we have been discussing rugby union and the impacts of the financial issues for Wales and England, and you look at the struggles that Wales and England international rugby union have had in the last couple of years. especially in this World Cup. England really in a bad place. Wales not much better. Really poor Six Nations campaign, some really bad defeats, and really underwhelming squad selections and lack of um, expectation on these two sides to do anything. And sports finances is a big part of that. Unstable finances, clubs struggling to survive or going bust, players uncertain about professional playing futures, and uncertain about sport long term and whether it's viable to continue playing or to look at a different career option and leave the sport altogether. Yeah, I mean, okay, you could say you could strengthen the Dragons franchise, but really, the sport in Wales is making no money. Is already losing money heavily. You just added an extra set of players and fans to be disappointed as things currently stand. You would have to change the structure, definitely. You could add the Wirral, yes, add it to Flintshire, and Tranmere Rovers suddenly become one of the biggest clubs in Wales overnight. It's a big population in the Wirral, and there is a fair few football players who have come from the Wirral who are very, very good, who have represented England over the years. So there's a good talent pool in the Wirral, um, and a lot of those young talented players throughout from footballing history have gone on to play for Tranmere, Everton, and Liverpool, and have done very, very well. There's a big Irish population historically, so John Aldrich, for example, um, obviously ex-Liverpool and Everton and Tranmere player, uh, Republic of Ireland international. So you could say that would add a fair add the Wirral to Flintshire, and suddenly you've got a sporting powerhouse in regional Wales. Absolutely, I think that is something very interesting. It's an interesting discussion point there. But again, hypothetical. It's hypothetical. I like the way you've linked it into the historical discussion we had for the best part of 40 minutes. But yeah, um, I think people on the Wirral, see themselves as not quite scouts, but they see themselves in a certain light. I think they're fiercely proud of the sporting talent they produced. I think they're fiercely proud of Tranmere Rovers as a football club. I think Tranmere Rovers as a football club is quite an underrated fan base. Hasn't quite achieved obviously the heights of Liverpool and Everton, but they've had some good players over the years, and they're a very solid football club. Which had some down years in the non-league, but pretty solid football club. Just overshadowed by their nearest and dearest in Liverpool and Everton. But I would say the Wirral as part of Merseyside, but for part of the country, there's been a lot of talent come out of the Wirral that isn't just football players. There's a lot of talented athletes come out of the Wirral, and it's also the wealthy bit of Merseyside, basically. If you live in the Wirral, your class is middle class. So, we could, in theory, have a 10-team top flight in Wales, yes. And there's some good clubs in there. If we're hypothetically structuring a Welsh league to make it more competitive and therefore ultimately improve the UEFA coefficient, then a Welsh league which is separate from the English league could do quite well if you add some English clubs to it. It would be more competitive, but then you've got to try and say hypothetically, would they be able to keep the current players they have? Because with the way football has gone, you want to play in the Premier League. So suddenly Cardiff and Swansea, Wrexham, Newport, those clubs that currently play in the English Football League system, and Swansea and Cardiff play in the Premier League, suddenly you're going to lose your best talent to the big league over the border. What I think Wales as a sporting nation needs to do is combine its league system with the English league system. They do it in ice hockey. The biggest clubs in football play in the English system. I think a no-brainer would be combine. They do it in rugby league as well. But a no-brainer would be to combine their rugby union setup with the English setup side of things, because they can't manage the domestic side of things at all. I think that is the way to go forward, in order to make Welsh sport financially viable. you're going to lose you're going to lose some teams along the way. But I would say combining the Welsh clubs in rugby union and football into the English league structure is possibly the only way um, rugby union and football are going to have a viable financial future in Wales outside of the football clubs that already play in the English league system. The Welsh domestic football league is crap, and the Welsh domestic rugby union system below the United Rugby Championship is crap. Financially, it's a mess. Crowd numbers are hopeless, and there's a lack of faith in the Welsh FA and the Welsh Union, Rugby Union, to actually really invest. And it's a mess. I honestly think it's a mess. Personally, there needs to be a massive, if as I say, domestically, outside of the clubs that already play in the English league system in football, rugby union and football, they need to combine their remaining clubs into an English join up with the English league system. It's the only financial way to save any of them. Some clubs are going to go bust long before long. You will lose clubs doing it, but I think it's the only way that Wales can continue to develop players that will go on to represent Wales in international football and rugby union and increase the player base. Could you have an independent country with all those settlements added? It's possible. Population-wise, there are smaller countries than with what you add. On a sporting level, there are smaller countries that have done pretty well. Iceland's got a smaller population, and they seem to do quite well, especially in football, men's and women's, for a population of their size. So it's doable. And you could, yeah. As well, in regards, as I say, to um, what would get Cardiff, what would Cardiff get in the Welsh League, or crowd number wise? It would be like the old firm with Swansea, really, and Wrexham and Newport. I mean, they'll be where the crowd numbers are highest when they're away from home. When they're playing each other, the crowd numbers will be the crowd numbers. But when they are the home team against, let's say, Llanelli or Aberystwyth, or Bala Town or the New Saints, the stadium won't be full. The away end would be Swansea and Newport and Wrexham in the English league system. It just won't work. I think the crowd numbers would be about 7,000 less than what they are now. You won't get capacity crowds. You only get capacity crowds on a Cardiff Swansea derby match, or a Cardiff Newport match, or a Wrexham, any of those three match. You wouldn't get sellouts unless it was those big four. You would not sell out, because they're going to constantly batter the smaller teams, and you will end up with a situation like Scotland. You really would, and that's not beneficial to anyone. That's why I do think the Welsh clubs in the Welsh Premier need to join with England in the English league system, or you merge the two. I would say join with England. England and Wales need to work together. Their FAs need to work together for the viability of the Welsh game, and to a certain extent, the non-league English game as well. There are massive money issues at all levels of the pyramid. Premier League notwithstanding, the finances of football, rugby union, rugby league, even Iceland, they're all a mess. Sports finances are a shambles and have been for a long time, and they've been sugar-coated by the TV deals and sponsorship deals. No, not the well. No, it's well, no is the answer. And I know it sounds harsh, but I think it's the truth. I think for the Welsh football clubs and the Welsh rugby clubs to have any hope of the majority of them being profitable and surviving long term, I think they have to merge with the English league system. And I think it will benefit the English system as well. It massively would benefit the English system. I think it will benefit player development, talent scouting, because there's no doubt there are lads and lasses, women's football, who are playing rugby union and football in Wales in the Welsh domestic league systems, who are going unspotted because they're not on national or international TV. They're going unspotted because they're not playing European games. They're going unspotted um, because they're playing Barla Town versus the New Saints. It's not really going to get a talent scout from Man City to go down, or Chelsea, or even the Bristol clubs, for example, or whatever. Even maybe with some of the Welsh clubs like Cardiff. It's not going to get a talent scout to go, that guy can play in the Championship of the Premier League. It's not happening. The Irish system, if you look at the Irish system, it produces talent. Scotland, I think you just need to alter the league structure where the top two leagues merge together and you have a bigger top flight, maybe 16 to 18 teams, and you only play each other twice, because playing each other 4 times doesn't work, and you mean you're playing more clubs basically, but only twice a season in the league rather than 4 times a season, which would benefit Scottish football, having a bigger top flight. That's what I would change about Scottish football. I wouldn't integrate the Scottish clubs into the English league system, because Scottish clubs have a very established league system that, apart from in the last 20 years, actually works very well for them. Very well for them, historically. Obviously, recently it hasn't, through the dominance of Rangers and Celtic, but historically, ironically, as I said, look at the Dundee sides and Dundee United sides, Aberdeen, Hibs, Hearts. They've won a fair bit of silver as well. And when I get to Hibs and Hearts, their histories, you'll see the success they've had historically as well, and why the old firm haven't always, as in Glasgow, as in Rangers and Celtic, other Glasgow clubs like Partick, I've done a video on, and Queen's Park, have won all the trophies. Yeah, I think combining the club structures of Wales and England, especially in rugby union, definitely. We've already got Welsh clubs playing football in the system, but rugby union, they need to work together. The two unions hate each other. There's definitely issues in governance, and the money side of it makes sense. Not all the clubs are going to survive. We've already lost 3 English Premiership clubs at the top level. 2 of them are very successful clubs at the top level have gone. That should be a warning sign that the Welsh game is completely buggered, and the English game is not much better. There needs to be, I think the Welsh, have they got it right? Well, the Welsh domestic football league is crap, because the best team is English. The best team in the Welsh top flight is English. That tells you all you need to know. That was how the days. Yeah, look. Cardiff and Swansea have always been in the English league system. I think there will be resistance from their fans. I think there'll be resistance actually from the Football League and the Premier League should Swansea kind of get back there to lose them. They're a big draw. They do have an international following, and the money's in English football. To lose them, lose a couple of million Welsh fans. And most Welsh fans, when it comes to club football, follow the Premier League. Look at how important it was for Wrexham as a Welsh club to get back to the Football League, what it meant to the town, which is now a city, what it meant for the fans. They see themselves as an English club in the sense of the club side of it, even though Welsh internationals have been played at the racecourse ground. Look how important that was. Take that away from Wrexham, they have nothing. Newport County, when they got back to the Football League, how important it was for Newport County fans that were back in the big time, as they call it. So those 4 clubs will not want to join the Welsh league system. It makes no sense. The fans will be like, why are we doing this? They will be against it. And if your own fans are against it, you automatically kill yourselves. It's commercial suicide, which is why I think the Welsh clubs outside of the big 4 in Wales, there are others obviously in the non-league as well who play in the English non-league system. Those Welsh clubs that play in the Welsh league system, their long-term viability to make any money is to look at the English system. And when the best club in the Welsh league system is the New Saints from Shropshire, in England. That tells you all you need to know about how bad the Welsh system is and how it's not working. And then you look at Welsh Rugby Union, not good. Welsh Premiership and Rugby Union is not good. Not good at all. And that's a higher participation. But again, I would like the English Premiership and Welsh professional teams to play in one. Yeah, I would as well. I think that will create some intense rivalries. Ooh, that like the Bristol versus Cardiff, for example, or Newcastle or the Dragons. That would sell out every bloody week. Gloucester versus any of the Welsh Cup would sell out. If Worcester had to survive, that would sell out. That's a no-brainer. You could easily sell some of those four big Welsh regions that we currently have. Easily sell Cardiff, Bristol. That'd be a riot. That would sell itself. If Welsh Pool had a decent team, which I think they do in the domestic, Welsh Pool, sure, that would sell out. With any team from England, that would sell out. You know, that there would not be an empty seat in any stadium. That would sell that out easy. You promote it's easy. Absolutely ridiculous how we're not. And yeah, Gloucester. I mean, yeah, we have Gloucester City in the non-league, but there's a reason why Gloucester Rugby Union is the only team in town, really. So they sell out every week. Doesn't matter how good or bad the team is. Recently, the team hasn't been fantastic. Right? That is one club. It's one club city. Cheltenham's the football town. Gloucester is the rugby town, and the Cheltenham-Gloucester conurbation in Gloucestershire. If you're a football fan, you follow Cheltenham. If you're a rugby fan, you follow Gloucester. There's your divide. There are football fans in Gloucester who follow Cheltenham, and there's rugby fans in Cheltenham who follow Gloucester. I would say Gloucester City in the non-league are half decent. But Forest Green is just a pub team. And I say that tongue-in-cheek. I've got nothing against Forest Green Rovers fans, because there's a fair few of them. They've got a hardcore small following, but their fan base is tiny. The owner's the problem, not the club. The owner's the problem. With his plans to move the club from Nailsworth, I think will kill them. They can't fill the new lawn now. What they're going to do with this proposed 10,000 seat stadium, they can't fill a 5,000 seat, well, a 5,000 capacity stadium. I've got nothing against Forest Green Rovers as a football club or their fan base, however small and cult that fan base is, and how niche that fan base is. But you take that club out of Nailsworth, you kill Forest Green Rovers. How the fans can agree with Dale Vince on that one, I don't know. Why not just invest in the new lawn, improve the away end, you might get better attendances. It's a no-brainer. Try and keep it at home. The club has been in Nailsworth for over 100 years. To move them out of their home, spiritual home, you've just killed that football club. They will become nothing more than a proper joke. There's a reason why the club is even before Dale Vince comes along. Forest Green Rovers had that cult following where they were that proper non-league village club who occasionally made the early stages of the FA Cup round, first, second, and third round of the FA Cup. You know, they were the small version of Yeovil. They did some giant killings. They made the first round proper. They made the second round a few times. They went on a few little cup runs after going through the qualifying rounds. But for me, what they need to do, and that's on the owner, is invest in improving the facilities at the new lawn now. Make it an all-seater stadium. Make it maybe 6,000. Maybe slightly improve that away end. Actually put some seats in there, some standing seated terraces, right? Actually make the away end appealing to away fans. You might get more away fans going down there. You might sell out the away fan ticket allocation. You might actually get more fans in attendance, home and away. Planning a brand new stadium, moving it away, just kill the football club because it's Nailsworth is its home. Move it out of Nailsworth and killed it. Stone dead. Stone dead. Killed it. That's why I don't understand the direction this club is taking. They've made the Football League, which is a fantastic achievement. Any club that makes a promotion and goes to a level they've never been to before is an achievement. There's no doubt. What happens afterwards? I mean, yeah, he's gone through 3 managers in a season or a year. I think 4 managers now in the space of 12 months. That's not sustainable. That is what bad owners do. The proposal they have in place to replace the new lawn is madness. Madness. It makes no sense to. Just makes no sense. It just doesn't. Evening down, I hope you're keeping well. I hope, obviously, the weather conditions in California and an uptick in earthquakes. And we've had that Category 4 hurricane. Or was it a Category 1? It was a Category 4 tropical storm, I think. It was a big hurricane. Yeah, California, well, North America's had a lot of drought, forest fires, a few earthquakes. So there's also a volcano in Alaska that's erupting quite, I think, Shishaldin or whatever, up in the Aleutians. Yeah, the west coast of the US and Canada is not having a good time right now. I hope you're keeping well. Yeah, a lot of sports stuff to discuss. I would obviously just check out some of my recent content down and understand what I'm discussing. I did a video comparing North American with European sports. So we'll see what happens. Forest Green versus Cheltenham is known as El Glossico. Yeah, you've got to have a bit of tongue in cheek. The level both clubs are playing at, the level where they're at. Cheltenham more established as a football league side. I've got to do it. I think have I done a Cheltenham Town? I've got to do a Cheltenham Town video. I think I have to double check if I've done a Cheltenham Town video. So I think one of the clubs on the to-do list. I'm keeping okay. Obviously, the hair's gone. I've done my Mark Knight, the GOAT Rugby League haircut, or the Eric Ten Hag look. Yeah, I think Forest Green Rovers have reached their ceiling for now, but for me, it's more coming down to the direction that the current owner is taking. I think a new owner may go, we're staying in Nailsworth, we're investing in our facilities in Nailsworth to modernise the new lawn, and we're going to stay in the community. Dale Vince, yeah, he's taken him to the Football League, but I think now he's starting to become a bit more eccentric than he needs to be in regards to making all the players go vegan, all the staff go vegan. You have to do this. I would say that's in breach of employment law, but when it comes to sport, employment law is slightly different. There's some exemptions. And there's plans, as I say, to move the club. I think it's 16 miles away. When you've already got a small fan base, and you're in a very rural location where, and you're in a part of the country where football is not the top sport to do that, you're automatically shooting yourself in the foot long term because you're going to get even less fans going through the game. My favourite sports moment so far. Jesus. That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I think Australia, France, the Women's World Cup quarter-final penalty shootout. I think that was insane. Highest TV viewership in Australian history. I think 17 million Australians watched that penalty shootout. Of a was it 7 million? Australia's only got a population like 23 million. So for most of the population of Australia to watch that moment is insane. That's predicted. TV viewership in Australia. I think the Challenge Cup final was a big sporting moment. A team that I didn't want to win won with the ugliest kit in the history of ugly kits. Hideous, famously hideous. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really have a favourite moment so far because the year hasn't ended yet. I think was the Bracknell Town FA Cup tie, was it before or after Christmas? I think it was before Christmas. That was last year. The Rugby League World Cup was last year. It's a difficult one. It is a difficult one, actually. World Cup final was last year. No, it's a difficult one. I don't really have a favourite sports moment so far per se. Um, I've watched a fair bit. I've missed today, obviously, the European Le Mans Series racing on the, is it the Algarve racing or Aragon in Spain. I've got to watch that. I missed that today. I've got to watch that. 4 hours of Aragon in the European Le Mans Series, but I would say the 6 hours of Spa. Yeah, the 6 hours of Spa World Endurance Series where the cars didn't have tyre warmers and they're flying off all over the place. That was kind of fun watching that. Some of the Aussie supercars, I've enjoyed some of the races so far, but I'm looking forward to the Endurance V8 Supercars race at Sandown, which is the precursor to the Bathurst 1000 Endurance V8 Supercars race. I'm looking forward to those two races in the V8 Supercars. They are going to be fun. Of course, if you're a sports car fan and you like motorsport, the great race is the Bathurst 1000, which is the V8 Supercars endurance race. The longest one of it's done by laps. It's not done by time, it's done by laps. The longest one went for 6.5 hours, which was insane. 1,000 miles, or is it 1,000 kilometers? The longest one around the Bathurst Mount Panorama circuit went for, yeah, was it? Last year's race was insane, but the 2014 one in last year's race are the two that stick out for me. But I'm looking forward to Sandown because that's now an endurance event again, where two drivers share a car and you get some wild card entries. I'm looking forward to those, and they're in the coming weeks. I've enjoyed the NRLW season so far, and I enjoyed Women's State of Origin. Admittedly, yes, Queensland win the series on points count back, but technically it's a tied series where both sides win a game. So there's that. West Ham winning Europa Conference League. I think, hey, that they've won their first trophy in how many years? My lifetime. And they've been to a couple of finals in that time. So West Ham winning a major trophy was a highlight. Man City winning the treble, yeah, it didn't feel very special. No, I didn't. And that's with the backdrop of what's going on. But it's difficult. I don't really have a favourite moment so far, really. Yeah, there's been some great sporting moments, but I've done my history of Leeds United. They've got a big fan base. They were a very dominant side in the 60s and 70s. They had a very dominant spell where they were the best team in the country for about a decade. Admittedly, Man United and Liverpool and Nottingham Forest, Derby at that time were their main rivals for winning silverware. But the Don Revie Leeds United sides of the 60s and 70s were scary good. But their fan base is absolutely massive. Massive fan base. Very well supported club. Yes, they haven't won as much as people think. But I've done the Leeds United history video, and they have some big rivalries with some other big clubs. I think Leeds United, obviously, in more recent times, have had their struggles. They've been as low as the third tier. Um, they haven't had the success I think they should have. I don't think they kicked on after winning the last old Division One title in the 91-92 season. They didn't kick on in the Premier League era as much as they should have. But yeah, their style of football they are playing over the last couple of years, over the last 5-6 years, it's fun to watch as a neutral. As a Leeds fan, you've got to be going, how many goals are we going to hold on to this lead today? Are we going to be able to defend a 1-0 lead? No is the answer. We've scored 3 goals. We should have won. We lost 5-3. How? That sort of Leeds at the moment is they can win and they can score a hatful of goals. And even winning defensively, they're a shambles. The best way to Leeds is, you've scored 4 goals. Our mantra is we'll score 5 then, and you can't do that. You can do it on the occasional game where you have a 5-3 or a 4-2 or a 4-3, but that seems to be Leeds' philosophy. We're just going to outscore you then. and it's fun to watch. It's like Brazil in the 1970 World Cup. It's like, okay, you have the ability to score a hat, but we'll just score more. You can do that in short spells. So a World Cup Brazil won in 1970 with the same kind of all-out attack football. You can do for 7 games. You can't do it on a 42 game season, or what is it, 46 game season. You cannot do it over a full season. It's just not feasible to be successful and win at the percent rate you need to win to be successful. In order to be generally a decent side, you've got to have a win rate of around 60-65% to be a decent team. Leeds' win percentage far below that. But my God, they are entertaining to watch as a neutral. They were entertaining last year in the FA Cup. Fantastic. There was one game where they won, I think, 5-2, and they should have won like 7-0. So it was a 7-goal game, but they should have had all 7 goals. Right. My thoughts on Huddersfield Town. I've done my club history video on Huddersfield Town last year. Very historical club. Again, people are surprised they've actually won stuff, as in silverware, back in the day. But it's rugby league country, which I think hinders the football club. It's a rugby league, the home of rugby league. Huddersfield is where rugby league was born in 1895 when it splits from rugby union. So Huddersfield Town is rugby league country, which I think hinders the club a little bit. But hey, they were the first club to win 3 league titles in a row. There you go. I've got to do a video on Herbert Chapman and the trophies he won at Huddersfield and at Arsenal, and his revolutionisation of the sport. I think Herbert Chapman was the first guy to use 4-4-2 as a formation. The fact that again they're another team with American money, is that good or bad? I wouldn't say selling every seat for the same price is a bad thing. I think there were other issues at play as why they were in financial difficulty. They weren't selling out the stadium. There were some transfers they did when they were in the Championship last time before the Premier League. There were some issues with the contracts they had players signed to when they were previously in the Championship before they went to the Premier League, and then their Premier League stint. There were some issues going on there. Definitely some issues going on there. Is football in the rise in that part of Yorkshire? Football has been established in that part of Yorkshire for a very, very long time. Rugby league is the more popular sport in that part of Yorkshire, but neither sport's going anywhere. Rugby union doesn't have an imprint. Cricket is Yorkshire wide, so there's that. Bradford City, Bradford City's got a big fan base. Again, that's in rugby league country, but historically you've got Bradford Park Avenue. Got to do a video on them as well. Bradford Park Avenue, the other club of Yorkshire that you forget about. But no, Bradford City have always had a solid fan base, and they've had their success historically. Again, not winning as people are surprised by the lack of success in certain markets for the history and their involvement in the sporting history. What Middlesbrough's Yorkshire? It's not Teesside. They're Smoggies. It's Teesside. It's Middlesbrough's got more of a link with County Durham and Cleveland than Yorkshire, but it's that area that's River Estuary. It's just same with Hull. People in Hull don't see Hull as part of Yorkshire, even it is. Humberside and Teesside, those estuaries and those industrial cities of Middlesbrough and Hull, they are historically part of Yorkshire, but they're not. But they're more linked to Hull's got more links with Lincolnshire and Cleethorpes and Grimsby, and Middlesbrough's got more links with seems more to be linked with like with Teesside and Stockton and Darlington, which are Yorkshire, but don't feel like Yorkshire. They feel more like Cleveland. Oh, while we're doing this geography and history lesson, it's really weird. It's fun, but it's distracting. I know I put general hangout, and I'm dying to go to the toilet. Need it. Don't drink 2 cans of this before and during a live stream because you will need a piss. You will need to relieve yourself. Yeah, Teesside is like Merseyside, and Humberside is like Merseyside. No, because I really need to go, and I will be gone for some time. I'm going to do my captain. I'm going to do my captain oats, and I'm going outside. I'm going to be some time and not come back. I also need to take a shit. I need to do a one and a two. This is what happens when you have lots of caffeine. You want to go to the toilet. And to be fair, it is now 9:20 my time. I've been going for nearly 3 and a bit hours. Um, yeah, you can wait. I can't because I also want to. I want to actually watch the 4 hours of Aragon European Le Mans Series. I love my endurance motorsport. I want to see who wins that race. I missed the live race, but I can get it going for a little bit longer. In regards to Huddersfield, it is rugby league country, hence why the football club comes along later. And look at the foundation date of Huddersfield Town, how late they are in comparison to the teams from Lancashire in the Midlands. That's what surprises people. It's Leeds United, Bradford City, Huddersfield. They are established a lot later than the clubs from the. But the Sheffield clubs are some of the old, Sheffield United, Sheffield Wednesday are old clubs, very historical clubs. But you look at it, and you look at the foundation of the Football League and the Football Alliance, which is sort of the rival to the Football League that gets merged into the Football League after a very short time. Look where the clubs come from, and then look at rugby league and its foundation, the foundation clubs of rugby league. So your Halifaxes, your Huddersfields, um, your Batley Bulldogs, as they would be now. You look at the founding clubs of rugby league, more of a Yorkshire influence on the rugby league side of things, more of a Lancashire influence on the football league side of things. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. What am I doing next geography live stream? I'm going to have to do a lot more geography and history videos on the other channel, and look. And with that, I will look at places like Shrewsbury, places like Chester, places like Runcorn, places like Wrexham, places like you know Hereford, Bristol, Cardiff, um, places like Berwick upon Tweed, which is in England, but has their football club play in Scotland, and they're north of Hadrian's Wall. So technically, they're a Scottish settlement historically. Border town. All these border towns are on rivers. It's the same when you go into mainland Europe. You've got Strasbourg and Metz, which are part of France, but have been part of Germany. Eupen in Belgium, part of Germany before, now part of Belgium. Places in Italy that it's really interesting, and I've got to do videos on the other channel because that's going to blow people's minds when we look at places like Metz, Strasbourg, Berwick upon Tweed, Carlisle, River Eden. Yeah. When we look at Shrewsbury, we look at Hadrian's Wall is the old border between England and Scotland. So when the Angles, Jutes, and Saxons come, and then the Danes, that was the border between the Kingdom of Strathclyde, for the most part, not all, because Kingdom of Cumberland and Celtic kingdoms of Cumbria, but that was the border between the Angles, Saxons, Jutes, and Danes. And Kingdom of Strathclyde was Hadrian's Wall. The Picts, it was done to stop the Picts raiding and invading northern Roman Britain, basically. The Basque Country, I've got to do videos on the Basque Country. That is mental. The Basque Country is like Brittany and Cornwall went on holiday to Spain, but went to the wrong coast. Rather than going to the Costa del Sol and the Costa Brava, whatever it is, the Balearics, Cornwall and Brittany decided to go on holiday to industrialize northeast Spain and stay there because the Basque language says a lot of similarities with Breton and Cornish. Very interesting. Mikel Arteta, Mendieta, another Basque. There was another famous Basque player. Lorente played for Tottenham. He was a Bilbao player. Iker Muniain, another one. Iker Casillas. Iker is a Basque first name. So Iker Casillas. I think you'll find that Casillas is a Castilian name, but Iker, as a first given birth name, is Basque. So Iker Casillas has got Basque heritage. There you go. Mikel, the way it's spelled, is a Basque spelling of Michael. Really interesting. I know Mendieta, Gazikia, pronounce his first name. Mendieta's got some Basque in him as well. And Casillas, Iker as a given name, as a birth name is Basque. Casillas is Castilian, obviously. Casillas, Castilian. But at some point, there's some Basque in his heritage. It's just Spain's interesting. I've got videos on the Basque country, and I've got a good book on the Spanish Civil War and the Republican nationalists and the build up to it and the aftermath. Got to dig it out somewhere down there. I've got to dig it out, and we'll look at the Basque country and Navarre. So Henry IV of French is also the King of Navarre, which is a Basque kingdom of Franco-Spanish Basque kingdom. That was a separate kingdom until Henry IV becomes King of France. Yes, La Coruña was part of Portugal at one point. Yes. So there is that. Anyway, I'm going to call that a stream. Thank you very much. Yes, well, I've got some videos on the history book, and I've only done one video this year, a couple of videos this year on the other channel, and I'm neglecting it. I'm neglecting it terribly, and I'm going to do some history videos in some places. So I'm going to call that a stream. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate some of the questions. We've discussed a lot, and yes, we did have a bit of a geographical history lesson in there as well. The geography of the UK and Ireland, and then bits of mainland Europe gets a bit interesting. Yeah. I haven't even got started on North America yet and Central America. That's just fun. Yeah. There's a reason one country in South America speaks Portuguese, one country speaks English, and one country speaks Dutch. And there's a colony in South America. The nicked half of it, but Mexico nicked half. Yeah, the USA nicks half of Mexico. There you go. There's a reason why we have a state called New Mexico. Yeah, weird that. And why some of the place names in the US are Spanish, like Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Sacramento, and most of California, New Mexico, and Arizona have Spanish place names. So there you go. Anyway, for now, thank you very much for watching. I will have some more content for you guys very, very soon.